Fort Hood stood resolute under the Texas sun. American flags snapped in the breeze as hundreds of uniformed soldiers assembled on the parade ground. Their brass gleamed, their posture perfect. They had come to honor one of their own. Colonel James Morrison walked across the stage, spine straight despite his 65 years. The medals on his chest caught the sunlight. 3 rows of colored ribbons, the silver star prominent among them. 40 years of service etched in his weathered face. They called him Iron Jack for a reason. General Roberts stepped to the microphone. Today we bid farewell to a legend, Colonel James Morrison, tank commander, leader, American hero. Morrison's mind drifted as the general spoke. The parade ground faded. Kuwait, February 1991, Operation Desert Storm. The interior of his M1 Abrams tank felt like an oven. Sand had worked its way into everything. His crew was exhausted after 36 hours without sleep. Intelligence had reported Iraqi armor ahead. Morrison peered through his commander's sight, nothing but empty desert. Then his gunner's voice crackled in his headset. Contact, 2 o'clock, 700 meters. Morrison swiveled his periscope. There they were, T-72s emerging from their hiding places. Iraqi Republican Guard, the elite, sand-colored tanks advancing in formation. All units, this is Iron Horse 6. Engage at will. I repeat, engage at will. Morrison dropped into his seat. The Abrams turbine engine roared as his driver pushed forward. The tank commander felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the sensation of 4 men becoming one machine. Target identified, T-72, 700 meters. Fire when ready. The 120mm main gun thundered. The Abrams rocked back on its suspension. Through his sight, Morrison watched the depleted uranium rounds streak across the desert. A direct hit. The enemy tank erupted in flame. Target destroyed. New target, T-72, 800 meters. Fire. Another hit. Another Iraqi tank destroyed. The radio filled with reports as his company engaged. American tanks moving with precision. The enemy in disarray. Iraqi crews abandoning vehicles. By nightfall, Morrison's company had destroyed 16 enemy tanks without losing a single American life. Albergan oil field. The battle would become legend in armor circles. The day when American tank superiority was proven beyond doubt. Morrison blinked. The memory faded. He was back at Fort Hood. The general was still speaking. Colonel Morrison's leadership at Albergan earned him the Silver Star. But that was just one chapter in an extraordinary career. Morrison surveyed the crowd. Young soldiers who had never seen combat. Veterans who understood what he had experienced. In the front row sat Lieutenant General William Peterson, West Point classmate, fellow tank commander, now Deputy Commander of the Army for Strategic Development. Morrison had thought his career would end here, a respectable ceremony, a gold watch, then retirement in Arizona, time for fishing, time to finally write the memoir his publisher had been requesting for years. The general concluded his remarks. Morrison stepped to the podium. He had prepared a speech but found himself setting it aside. 40 years ago, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. His voice carried across the parade ground, deep, authoritative. That oath has no expiration date. He looked at the young soldiers. You will face challenges I never imagined. Technology changes, battlefields change, but courage remains constant. Truth remains constant. Honor your oath. Protect your crews. Bring everyone home. Morrison paused. His throat tightened unexpectedly. The most important weapon in any tank isn't its gun or its armor. It's the 4 souls inside, remember that. After the ceremony, Peterson approached. Distinguished despite his 67 years. Silver hair cropped in the same military cut he had worn for decades. Powerful words, Jack. Wasn't sure the young ones were listening. They were. You've earned that respect. They walked together toward the reception, away from the crowds. Retirement plans still include that fishing cabin? Peterson asked. That's the idea. Got a place picked out in Arizona, near Flagstaff, mountains, trees, no more desert if I can help it. Peterson nodded, but Morrison could see something troubled him. You didn't come all the way to Texas just for my retirement ceremony, Will. No, Peterson's voice lowered. I need you in Washington. One last assignment. Morrison stopped walking. I've done my time. This is different. Project Excalibur. The new tank program? $14 billion for vehicles we won't see for a decade? We need someone who knows tanks, someone with credibility, someone who will tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. There are plenty of armor officers in the Pentagon. None with your experience. None who can't be intimidated. None who aren't looking for their next promotion. Morrison studied his old friend. What's really going on, Will? I can't explain here, but something doesn't add up. The test results, the timelines, the pressure to move forward regardless of problems. Political pressure? Peterson nodded. And financial. Quantum Defense has shareholders to please, stock options to protect. Morrison sighed. He had planned to leave the Army behind, to find peace after decades of service. 3 months, Peterson said. That's all I'm asking. Review the program, give me your honest assessment, then go catch your fish. 3 months. You'll have full access, special advisor to my office. Morrison looked back at the ceremony breaking up behind them. Young soldiers, future tank crews who would stake their lives on the machines the Army provided. When do I start? Chapter 2, The Call from Washington. 1 week later, Morrison stood at the window of his Arlington apartment. Across the Potomac River, the Washington Monument pierced the morning sky. He had traded the Texas heat for the muggy air of a D.C. summer. The apartment belonged to the Army. Temporary housing for officers on special assignment. Sparse but functional. Morrison had unpacked his few possessions, hung his uniforms, arranged his books on armored warfare. The place still felt sterile, impersonal. His phone rang. Peterson's office. A car would collect him in 30 minutes. His security credentials were ready. Morrison dressed methodically. The uniform still fit perfectly despite his age. Silver eagles gleamed on his shoulders. He checked his appearance in the mirror. The face that looked back had seen 3 wars, had buried too many friends, had made decisions that sent young men into battle. The black Suburban arrived precisely on time. The driver remained silent during the journey to the Pentagon. Morrison watched the capital city pass by. Washington had changed since his last posting here. More security, more barriers. The nation had been at war for most of his adult life. The Pentagon loomed ahead, 5 concentric rings, 5 floors, the largest office building in the world, a fortress of American military might. Morrison had always found it impressive and slightly overwhelming. Today was no different. His escort met him at the river entrance, Captain Linda Santos. Efficient, professional. She guided him through security and into the labyrinth of quarters. General Peterson asked me to apologize. He's been called to the White House. He'll meet you this afternoon. Understood. In the meantime, I'll show you to your office. Then we have a briefing on Project Excalibur at 1000 hours. They walked through corridors lined with photographs of past wars, past weapons, past soldiers. Morrison recognized many of the tanks on display. The evolution of American armor from Sherman to Abrams. Iron giants that had shaped history. His assigned office was small but had a window, a luxury in the Pentagon. A computer awaited. Stacks of folders marked confidential, Project Excalibur documentation. Your credentials will allow access to most classified materials related to Excalibur, Santos explained. General Peterson has authorized top-secret clearance for this assignment. Morrison nodded. This was serious then. Peterson was giving him unrestricted access. The briefing will be in Conference Room E. I'll return to escort you at 9:45. Morrison settled behind the desk after Santos departed. He began reviewing the top folder. The Excalibur Next Generation Combat System. Technical specifications. Projected capabilities. Timelines for development and deployment. According to the documents, the Excalibur would revolutionize armored warfare. Active protection systems to intercept incoming projectiles. Hybrid electric drive for extended range. Automated targeting systems. Reduced crew requirements. Modular armor that could be rapidly replaced in the field. Impressive if true. Morrison had seen grand promises before. Reality often fell short. A knock interrupted his reading. He checked his watch. Too early for Santos to return. He opened the door to find a woman in her late 50s. Trim, professional in a blue suit. Her auburn hair showed streaks of gray, but her eyes were sharp. Familiar. Recognition dawned. Sarah Baker? Hello, Jack. Her smile revealed the same dimples he remembered from 30 years ago. It's been a long time. Sarah Baker, combat nurse. They had met during Desert Storm at a field hospital near the Kuwait border. Their relationship had been intense but brief. The chaos of war bringing them together. The return to peace pulling them apart. What are you doing here? I work here, medical director for combat systems testing. Have for 8 years. Morrison gestured her into his office. You look well. So do you. The silver hair suits you. An awkward silence fell. 3 decades of unspoken words between them. Well, Peterson told me you were coming, she finally said. Special advisor on Excalibur. That's right. Sarah's expression grew serious. Be careful, Jack. This project has complications. What kind of complications? She glanced at the open door, lowered her voice. There's tremendous pressure to move forward regardless of test results. Peterson is concerned, so am I. Political pressure and financial. Quantum Defense has invested billions in development. Their stock price depends on government contracts. That's nothing new. This is different. The CEO is Richard Blackwood, former Navy admiral, has connections throughout the defense establishment, and a reputation for getting what he wants. Morrison studied her. The years had added lines to her face but hadn't diminished her intensity. Why are you telling me this? Because you're honest, always have been, even when it was inconvenient. She smiled briefly. It's what I admired about you, even when it drove me crazy. Another knock. Captain Santos returning to escort him to the briefing. Sarah moved toward the door. We should catch up properly. Coffee sometime? I'd like that. Good. And Jack? Her expression turned serious again. Watch your back. Excalibur has powerful friends, and they won't appreciate tough questions. Chapter 3, First Signs. The briefing room was crowded when Morrison entered. Military officers in uniform, civilians in expensive suits. All rose when General Peterson entered behind Morrison. Gentlemen, ladies. Peterson gestured for everyone to be seated. Most of you know Colonel James Morrison, distinguished tank commander, veteran of 3 conflicts, Silver Star recipient. He's joining us as special advisor on Project Excalibur. Morrison noted the reactions. Most officers nodded respectfully. Several civilians exchanged glances. One man at the end of the table studied Morrison with open skepticism. Tall, fit despite his 60 years, the bearing of a naval officer even in civilian clothes. Colonel Morrison, this is Admiral Richard Blackwood, CEO of Quantum Defense, prime contractor for Excalibur. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Colonel, your reputation precedes you, as does yours, Admiral. Peterson gestured to the center of the conference table where a detailed model of a tank sat. Sleek, angular, unlike any American armor Morrison had seen. Colonel, the Excalibur represents the future of American armored warfare. Hybrid electric drive, reduced crew requirements, active protection systems, automated targeting. A young major stood and began a detailed presentation. Robert Hayes, project liaison officer. Earnest, knowledgeable. He walked through technical specifications, test results, and development timelines. Morrison listened carefully, asked occasional questions. The projected capabilities were impressive, almost too impressive. You're saying the active protection system has a 98% interception rate against RPGs and ATGMs? Morrison asked. That's correct, sir, Hayes replied. In all environments, desert, urban, woodland, the system has been tested extensively in all operational environments. And the 98% success rate was consistent across all these environments? A slight hesitation. The success rate varied slightly but remained above acceptable thresholds. Morrison made a note. Hayes had shifted from specific numbers to vague terminology. The briefing continued. Quantum Defense representatives highlighted the tank's automated systems, its reduced crew requirements, its extended operational range. 3 crew members instead of 4, Morrison observed, eliminating the loader position. The autoloader system is more efficient than human loaders, Blackwood stated. Faster, more reliable, doesn't get tired. And when it malfunctions, redundant systems, self-diagnostics, remote troubleshooting. In combat, we've eliminated single points of failure, Colonel. Morrison had heard similar claims throughout his career. Reality was always messier than briefing room presentations. The meeting concluded after 2 hours. Peterson pulled Morrison aside as others filed out. Initial impressions? Impressive if the performance matches the claims. That's the question, isn't it? I'd like to review the raw test data, not just the summary presentations. Of course, Major Hayes can provide everything you need. Peterson lowered his voice. And I've arranged for you to visit the testing grounds at Aberdeen next week. See Excalibur in action yourself. Morrison nodded. I'll reserve judgment until then. As they left the conference room, Morrison noticed Sarah Baker talking with Blackwood in the hallway. Their conversation appeared tense. Blackwood gesturing emphatically, Sarah's posture rigid. They fell silent as Morrison approached. Colonel, Blackwood nodded curtly before walking away. Morrison watched him go. Friend of yours? Sarah's expression was grim. Hardly. We have professional disagreements about test protocols. Such as, Quantum wants to limit medical monitoring during endurance tests, says it interferes with operational realism. And you disagree. Crew health impacts performance, especially in the confined space of Excalibur's crew compartment. She checked her watch. I have a meeting. That coffee offer still stands, though. I'll take you up on it. Throughout the following week, Morrison immersed himself in Excalibur documentation, technical specifications, test reports, development timelines. The more he reviewed, the more questions arose. The test results seemed impressive on the surface, but inconsistencies emerged when he cross-referenced different reports. Success rates varied widely between testing environments. Certain operational scenarios appeared underrepresented or missing entirely. Morrison requested the raw test data from Major Hayes. The Major seemed uncomfortable but complied. The unfiltered data told a different story than the polished presentations. Urban operations testing showed significant limitations. The tank's advanced sensors struggled with the complex environment, building interference, multiple targets, civilian presence. Yet these limitations were minimized in summary reports. Reliability data showed frequent malfunctions in the autoloader system during extended operations. The three-man crew struggled to compensate during these failures. Yet the official reports emphasized mean time between failures rather than the operational impact of those failures. Most concerning were the crew endurance tests, limited to 8-hour operational periods under ideal conditions, no extended combat scenarios, no sleep deprivation testing, no operations under chemical or biological threat conditions. Real combat was never ideal. Morrison knew this from bitter experience. Tanks operated for days with minimal maintenance. Crews fought while exhausted. Systems failed at the worst possible moments. He made detailed notes, prepared questions. Something wasn't adding up. The visit to Aberdeen Proving Grounds came at the end of his first week. Morrison rose before dawn, dressed in his ACUs rather than his service uniform. This would be a day in the field, not an office. The helicopter flight from the Pentagon took less than an hour. Major Hayes accompanied him along with several quantum defense engineers. Aberdeen sprawled across the Maryland countryside, America's oldest active proving ground, where generations of weapons had been tested before being sent to war. A convoy of vehicles met them at the helipad. Morrison climbed into a Humvee with Hayes. They drove to a restricted testing area surrounded by security fencing. Warning signs, armed guards. We have a full demonstration plan, Hayes explained. Mobility tests, firing exercises, simulated combat scenarios. Who's crewing the vehicle? Quantum test team, former military, highly experienced. I'd like to speak with them before and after, without supervisors present. Hayes hesitated. Sir, that's not standard protocol. Make it happen, Major. Morrison's tone left no room for argument. The Excalibur tank waited on the test range. In person, it appeared even more futuristic than its model. Angular armor, low profile, sleek main gun, no visible hatches or viewports. Sensors and cameras instead of traditional sights. The test crew consisted of 3 men, all former military, all now employed by Quantum Defense. Morrison interviewed them briefly. They seemed competent but rehearsed, their answers matching the official briefings too perfectly. The demonstration began impressively. The tank maneuvered through obstacle courses, forded water barriers, climbed steep inclines, its hybrid electric drive providing remarkable acceleration and surprising stealth at low speeds. The firing demonstrations were equally impressive. The tank engaged stationary and moving targets at various ranges. The automated targeting system acquiring and hitting targets with remarkable precision. Yet Morrison noticed limitations not addressed in the briefings. The tank struggled in muddy terrain, its weight distribution different from traditional designs. The autoloader worked flawlessly during demonstrations, but operated more slowly than an experienced human loader during rapid-fire scenarios. After 4 hours of scripted demonstrations, Morrison made his request. I'd like to drive it. Hayes looked startled. Sir, that's not on the schedule. I didn't come here to watch a sales pitch, Major. I came to evaluate a fighting vehicle. The Quantum representatives conferred hurriedly, made phone calls, eventually relented with visible reluctance. Morrison changed into a tanker's coveralls, climbed aboard Excalibur through its unusual side hatch. The interior was unlike any tank he had commanded. Screens instead of viewports, touch panels instead of mechanical controls, more like an aircraft cockpit than traditional armor. The test crew provided a hasty orientation. Morrison settled into the commander's position. familiarized himself with the controls, the digital interfaces, the command systems. Let's take it through that ravine course. He pointed to a challenging terrain feature they had avoided during demonstrations. The tank moved smoothly under Morrison's command. The electric drive surprisingly responsive, the suspension adapting to terrain automatically. But as they entered the ravine with its sharp turns and steep sides, Morrison felt something the demonstrations had hidden. The tank's digital controls introduced a slight delay between command and execution. Milliseconds perhaps, but noticeable to an experienced commander. In combat, those milliseconds could mean the difference between survival and destruction. As they navigated a particularly tight turn, the tank's treads slipped unexpectedly. The vehicle lurched. Warning indicators flashed across the command screen. The drive system recalibrated automatically, but the moment of instability was concerning. "Does that happen often?" Morrison asked the quantum technician serving as driver. "Occasionally on extreme terrain, sir. The traction control system is still being refined. This isn't extreme terrain. This is standard European countryside, the kind our forces would encounter across NATO's eastern flank." The technician fell silent. Morrison completed the course, then ordered a second run at higher speed. The control issues became more pronounced. The tank's weight distribution and digital interfaces creating handling challenges in complex terrain. These issues appeared nowhere in the official test reports. After returning to the staging area, Morrison thanked the crew and walked aside with Major Hayes. The control lag in tight maneuvers. The traction issues on moderate slopes. Why aren't these documented? Hayes looked uncomfortable. "They're considered minor issues, sir, scheduled to be addressed in software updates before production." Minor. In combat, they could be fatal. The development team feels the issues are within acceptable parameters at this stage. Whose parameters? The Pentagon's or Quantum's shareholders? Hayes didn't answer. On the helicopter flight back to Washington, Morrison reviewed his notes. The Excalibur had impressive capabilities. Revolutionary in some respects, but significant issues remained unaddressed or minimized in official reporting. Sarah Baker was waiting when he landed at the Pentagon helipad. Her presence unexpected but not unwelcome. "How was Aberdeen?" "Enlightening." "That good?" Morrison managed a thin smile. "Let me buy you that coffee. I have questions." They found a quiet corner in the Pentagon's central courtyard, away from offices, away from listening ears. Morrison described what he had observed at Aberdeen, the impressive capabilities, the concerning limitations, the gaps between demonstrations and practical combat applications. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "Medical testing shows similar issues. Crew fatigue rates are higher than reported. The confined space, the reliance on screens rather than direct vision, it creates cognitive stress that accumulates over time. But those concerns aren't reflected in the summary reports. They're documented in my department's raw data, then minimized or eliminated as they move up the reporting chain." Morrison considered this. "Who's filtering the reports?" "That's the question, isn't it?" She looked around to ensure they weren't overheard. 2 months ago, I raised concerns directly with General Peterson. A week later, my department's testing budget was cut by 30%. On whose authority? The cuts came through regular budget channels, but the timing wasn't coincidental. Morrison's instincts were warning him, the same instincts that had kept him alive through 3 wars. Someone doesn't want potential problems documented. Quantum has 14 billion reasons to ensure Excalibur moves forward regardless of test results, and powerful friends in both the Pentagon and Congress. Morrison thought of Blackwood, his naval bearing, his political connections, his determination to protect his company's investment. "I need to speak with the test crews directly, not just at controlled demonstrations, the men who work with Excalibur daily." Sarah hesitated, then made a decision. "I can arrange that, unofficially. Several crew members have approached my medical team with concerns they won't voice officially." "Why come to your team?" "Medical conversations have confidentiality protections, and my staff isn't in their chain of command." Morrison nodded. "Set it up. It would have to be off-site, unofficial." "I understand." Sarah rose to leave, then paused. "Jack, be careful. There's more at stake here than one weapon system." "What do you mean?" "Quantum doesn't just want the Excalibur contract. They want to reshape how the Army develops and procures weapons, eliminate traditional testing protocols, reduce oversight, increase corporate control over military requirements. The military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned about. Exactly, but with modern technology and fewer checks and balances. She touched his arm briefly. "I'll be in touch about those crew interviews." Morrison returned to his temporary office, compiled his observations. drafted a preliminary report for Peterson detailing the disconnects between official presentations and observed performance. As he worked, his computer chimed with an incoming message. Raw test data from Major Hayes, more comprehensive than previous batches, including reports Morrison hadn't seen before. He opened the files. Read with growing concern. The unfiltered data showed systemic issues with the Excalibur's performance in complex environments. Software glitches during electronic warfare simulations. Drive system failures under extreme conditions. Targeting system degradation during extended operations. None of these issues appeared in the summary briefings. None were addressed in development timelines. Morrison cross-referenced the data with his own observations. The pattern became clear. Excalibur performed impressively in controlled demonstrations. But real-world combat wasn't controlled, was never predictable. His phone rang. Sarah Baker. I've arranged those meetings tomorrow night. An Irish pub in Alexandria. The crew members will be there after their shift. I'll be there. And Jack? I've been reviewing the test schedule. They're accelerating everything, cutting corners, safety protocols being bypassed. Why the rush? Congressional budget hearings next month. Quantum wants concrete commitments before anyone can raise questions. Morrison thanked her and hung up. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. He continued analyzing the raw data. Late into the night, the more he reviewed, the more certain he became. The Excalibur wasn't ready. Not for production, not for combat, not for the lives that would depend on it. His computer chimed again. Another message from Hayes, a video file attached. The message text simple. You should see this. Recorded last week, classified test run, not in official reports. Morrison opened the video, footage from inside an Excalibur during what appeared to be an electronic warfare test. Systems malfunctioning, screens flickering, the crew struggling to maintain control as the tank veered off course, warning lights flashing across control panels. The video ended abruptly, but its message was clear. Under simulated battlefield conditions against a technologically advanced adversary, the Excalibur's sophisticated systems proved vulnerable. Dangerously vulnerable. Morrison sat back, considered what he had learned, the pieces assembling into a troubling picture. Impressive technology being rushed to production before it was ready, test results being filtered to support predetermined conclusions, legitimate concerns being sidelined or buried. And behind it all, powerful interests with billions at stake. Corporate profits, political capital, military careers. Morrison had faced enemy tanks across battlefields on 3 continents, had made life and death decisions under fire, had led men into combat knowing some wouldn't return. This was different, more complex, less clear, but no less important. The lives of future tank crews would depend on the decisions being made now, in quiet offices, in corporate boardrooms, in Pentagon meeting rooms. Morrison closed the files, made his decision. He would find the truth, whatever it took. Regardless of who stood in his way, regardless of the consequences to his career or reputation. Some battles were fought with tanks and guns, others with information and integrity. Tomorrow he would meet the test crews, hear their unfiltered experiences, build his case. The mission was clear now. Protect the soldiers who would someday stake their lives on the Excalibur. Ensure they had a fighting vehicle worthy of their courage. Iron Jack had one more battle to fight. Chapter 4, the conspiracy begins to unfold. The Irish pub in Alexandria hummed with conversation, dark wood, brass fixtures, the scent of beer and whiskey. Morrison arrived early, chose a corner booth with a clear view of both entrances, old habits from too many combat zones. Sarah Baker entered shortly after 7. She spotted him immediately, nodded toward a group of men at the bar, 4 of them. Civilian clothes but military haircuts, the Excalibur test crew. She slid into the booth opposite Morrison. They'll join us one at a time, less conspicuous that way. They understand the risk they're taking? They insisted on this meeting, despite the risk. She studied him. You look tired, Jack. Long night reviewing test data. Find anything significant? Enough to confirm my suspicions, and yours. The first crew member approached. Tom Reeves, former Army sergeant, tank gunner with experience in M1A2 Abrams. Now senior test gunner for the Excalibur program. Colonel Morrison, Reeves kept his voice low. Thank you for meeting us. I appreciate your willingness to speak candidly. Reeves glanced around before continuing. What they're showing in demonstrations isn't the whole story, sir. The targeting system is impressive when everything works perfectly, But in extended operations, under battlefield conditions, different story. Explain. Electronic interference degrades performance significantly, more than the official reports acknowledge. The automated systems that work flawlessly in demonstrations fail under realistic combat scenarios. How often? During the NATO electronic warfare exercise last month, 4 complete system failures in 3 days left us blind and immobile for several minutes each time. That's not in any report I've seen, because it never made it into official reports, sir. We were told those incidents were outside test parameters and shouldn't be documented. On whose authority? Came directly from quantum leadership. Admiral Blackwood specifically. Morrison made mental notes, compared this information with what he had reviewed. What about the autoloader system? Reeves tensed visibly. That's the worst issue, sir. In demonstrations, it works perfectly. In extended field tests, it jams regularly, especially in dusty conditions or after rapid firing sequences. Can it be cleared manually? That's the problem, sir. The design prioritized automation over manual backup. Clearing serious jams requires partial disassembly of the mechanism. Can't be done under fire. So a single autoloader malfunction could render the main gun inoperable. Yes, sir, we've reported this repeatedly. Been told it will be addressed in production models. But there's no redesign in the current timeline. No, sir, just software patches that haven't solved the core mechanical issue. The conversation continued for 20 minutes. Reeves described other concerns: cooling system limitations, visibility restrictions, communication vulnerabilities. As Reeves returned to the bar, the second crew member approached. Michael Chen, drive system specialist, former Bradley mechanic. The hybrid drive is revolutionary, sir, when it works. But the integration between electric and conventional power creates critical vulnerabilities. What kind? The system requires constant computer management. Enemy electronic warfare can disrupt that management. We lost power completely during 3 separate NATO exercises. And the backup systems? Manual override exists, but transitions aren't smooth. Takes almost 40 seconds to switch over. That's an eternity when you're under fire. The pattern continued with each crew member. Impressive technology undermined by critical vulnerabilities. Legitimate concerns dismissed or downplayed in official reporting. The final crew member was James Wilson, test commander, 20 years in armor, combat veteran from Iraq and Afghanistan. The fundamental problem isn't the technology itself, Colonel. It's the rushed timeline. These systems need years of testing and refinement, not months. But Quantum has promised Congress a combat-ready vehicle by next fiscal year. Why the rush? Stock prices, congressional budget cycles, career advancement. Wilson's expression hardened. Not combat effectiveness, not crew survival. Has anyone in the chain of command addressed these concerns? We filed reports through proper channels. They disappear into the system. Meanwhile, test protocols are modified to avoid scenarios where problems have appeared previously. Wilson leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. Last month, we lost a test vehicle during a river crossing. Complete electronic failure. Nearly lost the crew. The incident was classified, removed from testing records. On whose authority? That information came directly from General Reynolds' office. Morrison recognized the name. 3-star general, head of Army acquisition, Peterson's superior. Widely rumored to be headed for lucrative defense industry employment after retirement. How many others in the test program share these concerns? Most of the hands-on personnel, sir. The people actually working with the vehicle rather than presenting PowerPoints about it. Wilson hesitated. There's something else you should know. Go on. Quantum has implemented unusual security measures around the program. Test crew communications monitored. Personal devices banned from test facilities. Unusual compartmentalization of information. Beyond standard security protocols. Far beyond, sir. Feels more like they're hiding something than protecting sensitive information. After the crew members departed, Morrison remained with Sarah, processing what he had learned. The picture was darker than he had initially suspected. Did their accounts match your medical data? He asked. She nodded. Crew fatigue rates are significantly higher than reported. Cognitive stress from the digital interfaces, physical strain from the confined crew compartment, all documented in medical evaluations, all minimized in summary reports. Why hasn't your department raised alarms? We have. Through proper channels, our concerns were acknowledged then effectively buried. Morrison considered his next steps. I need to speak with Peterson. Today's findings combined with the raw test data paint a disturbing picture. Be careful, Jack. Peterson supports your investigation, but his position isn't secure. There are powerful interests who want Excalibur to proceed regardless of test results. Morrison returned to his apartment late that night, the city lights visible through his window, his mind processing everything he had learned, organizing facts, identifying patterns, evaluating options. His phone rang. Unknown number. Morrison. Colonel, this is Major Hayes. The young officer's voice was tense, hurried. I don't have much time. They know I sent you that classified test footage. Who knows? Quantum security. They monitor all system access. I've been recalled to Aberdeen effective immediately. Reassignment pending security review. On whose authority? Orders came through official channels but originated from Quantum. They're cleaning house, sir. Anyone who's raised concerns about the program is being reassigned or investigated for security violations. That's not how the military operates, Major. It is when billions in contracts are at stake, sir. Hayes paused. There's more you should know. There's another test scheduled for tomorrow. Urban operations scenario. I've sent details to your secure Pentagon email. Thank you for your integrity, Major. Just find the truth, sir, before they will put soldiers' lives at risk. Hayes ended the call abruptly. Morrison checked his Pentagon email from his secure laptop. Hayes had indeed sent information about the upcoming test, along with access credentials for the live video feed from the test vehicle. Credentials he shouldn't have shared, a career-ending security violation if discovered. Hayes was risking everything to expose the truth. Morrison reviewed the test parameters. Urban combat simulation. Abandoned military housing area at Aberdeen. Multiple simulated threats. Civilian presence. Complex environment that had previously revealed Excalibur's limitations. The test was scheduled for 0900 tomorrow. Morrison would be watching. He was about to close his laptop when another email arrived. From Peterson's office. Encrypted. The message was brief. Meet me at the Jefferson Memorial. 0600 tomorrow. Come alone. Critical information. Morrison frowned. The request was unusual, outside normal protocols. But Peterson was not a man given to melodrama. If he requested such a meeting, it was for good reason. Morrison slept little that night, his mind sorting through all he had learned. The technical issues, the manipulated reporting, the institutional pressure to proceed despite problems. He rose before dawn, made coffee, dressed in civilian clothes, left his phone in the apartment to prevent tracking. The Jefferson Memorial stood peaceful in the early morning light, the white dome reflecting the rising sun. Few visitors at this hour. Morrison spotted Peterson immediately, alone on a bench facing the tidal basin. Peterson wore civilian clothes, a rarity for the career military man. He looked older than he had just days before. Tired, worried. Thank you for coming, Jack. Peterson's voice was subdued. I apologize for the cloak and dagger approach, but normal channels are no longer secure. What's happening, Will? There's more at stake than a flawed weapon system, much more. Peterson produced a thin folder. 3 days ago, I began investigating how test reports were being modified between raw data and executive summaries. Yesterday, I received this. Morrison opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph. Peterson entering a medical facility. The image date stamped 2 years earlier. I don't understand. That's the Walter Reed Oncology Center. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. Stage 3. Underwent experimental treatment. In remission now, but the prognosis remains guarded. Only my wife and my doctors know. Why is this relevant? Because someone sent this to my home address yesterday. No note, no explanation, just the photograph. A warning, Jack. They're letting me know they have access to my private medical information. Information that could end my career if made public. Morrison felt cold anger rising. Blackmail. Precisely. The message is clear. Back off Excalibur, or my medical history becomes public knowledge. The Army doesn't keep generals with terminal diagnoses in senior positions. Is there proof of who sent it? Nothing direct, but it came immediately after I requested full unredacted test data from Quantum. Morrison studied his old friend. What do you want me to do? Continue your investigation, but carefully, through unofficial channels. I'll maintain the appearance of cooperation officially. A two-track approach. Peterson nodded. Exactly. I need to know how deep this goes, Jack. Who's involved? How far they'll go to protect Excalibur. And when we have proof, we take it directly to the Secretary of the Army. Bypass the normal chain of command entirely. Morrison returned this photograph. Has there been pressure on you from above? General Reynolds called me personally last week. Suggested your investigation was disruptive to program momentum. Recommended I reassign you to a less sensitive role. And your response? I reminded him that as a combat veteran with extensive armor experience, you were uniquely qualified to evaluate Excalibur's battlefield viability. Peterson managed a thin smile. He didn't appreciate my perspective. How high does this go, Will? That's what we need to determine. Peterson checked his watch. We shouldn't be seen together outside official functions. Not now. I've arranged secure communication protocols through Sarah Baker's office. Medical channels are less monitored. Sarah is involved? She approached me initially with concerns about crew endurance testing. She's been documenting discrepancies between raw medical data and official reports for months. They parted ways as the memorial began filling with early tourists. Morrison walked along the tidal basin, processing this new information. The stakes were higher than he had realized. The opposition more determined, more ruthless. Simple technical concerns had evolved into something far darker. Blackmail, intimidation, corruption of the military acquisition process. Morrison returned to his apartment to prepare for the urban operations test viewing. His secure laptop connected to the Aberdeen test feed using Hayes's credentials. The test began precisely at 0900. Morrison watched as the Excalibur navigated the abandoned housing area. Multiple camera angles showing both the vehicle's exterior and the crew compartment. The tank moved cautiously through narrow streets, sensors scanning for threats. The crew operating with practiced efficiency. 20 minutes into the exercise, simulated enemies appeared. RPG teams, snipers, IEDs. The complex threat environment of modern urban combat. The Excalibur systems began showing strain. Target identification slowed. The automated systems struggling to distinguish combatants from civilians. Warning indicators flashing across crew displays. Then it happened. A simulated EMP attack. The tank's electronics flickered. Screens went dark momentarily. When systems rebooted, the targeting computer showed ghost images. False targets. The navigation system lost position tracking. The crew struggled to compensate manually, but the Excalibur's design prioritized automation over manual backup. The commander attempted to override the targeting system. Failed. The tank fired at a building marked as containing civilians. Exercise controllers immediately halted the test. The video feed cut abruptly. Morrison stared at the blank screen. What he had witnessed confirmed everything the test crews had reported. Under realistic combat conditions, the Excalibur's advanced systems created vulnerabilities rather than advantages. His Pentagon email pinged with a new message from Major Hayes. Test terminated due to equipment calibration error. Results classified by order of General Reynolds. I've been relieved of duty pending security investigation. Proceed with caution. Morrison closed his laptop. The evidence was mounting, the pattern undeniable, but he needed more than observations and anecdotes. He needed documented proof of deliberate falsification of test results, proof that would stand up to the inevitable counterattack when he presented his findings. His secure phone rang. Sarah Baker. Jack, we need to meet immediately. I found something in the medical test data that changes everything. Where? Lincoln Memorial, 1 hour. And Jack, make sure you're not followed. The warning sent a chill through Morrison. This had escalated beyond professional concern into something far more dangerous. But he had committed himself to this investigation, to protecting future tank crews who would stake their lives on the Excalibur. One more battle, perhaps his most important. As Morrison prepared to leave his apartment, he noticed a sedan parked across the street. 2 men inside, military haircuts, civilian clothes, watching his building with too much interest for coincidence. The conspiracy was widening, the opposition mobilizing. Iron Jack Morrison straightened his shoulders, checked the secure phone Peterson had provided, mapped a route to the Lincoln Memorial that would allow him to detect and evade surveillance. The battle for truth about Excalibur was entering a new phase. Higher stakes, greater risks. Some fought with tanks on distant battlefields. Others fought with information in the corridors of power. Both battles required courage. Both demanded sacrifice. Morrison had never backed down from a fight. Not when enemy tanks approached across Kuwaiti desert. Not when IEDs threatened his convoy in Baghdad. He wouldn't back down now. The lives of future tank crews depended on exposing the truth, whatever the personal cost, whatever powerful interest stood in his way. The warrior's path forward was clear. The Lincoln Memorial stood majestic against the morning sky. Tourists gathered on its marble steps. School groups. Families. No one paid attention to the silver-haired man in a windbreaker who approached carefully from the east side. Morrison circled the memorial grounds once before entering. Old habits. Always check for surveillance. Always know your exits. The two men watching his apartment had forced him to take a circuitous route. Metro to bus, bus to taxi, walking the final quarter mile. Sarah Baker waited inside, standing before Lincoln's massive seated form, her posture tense, alert. She too had been careful. Morrison had spotted her checking her surroundings as he approached. "Were you followed?" Her voice barely audible above the tourist chatter. "Possibly. There were watchers at my apartment." Morrison moved closer to the statue where fewer tourists lingered. "What was so urgent?" Sarah withdrew a small USB drive from her pocket. Medical data from the last 3 months of Excalibur crew testing. Unredacted, unfiltered. "How did you obtain this?" "I'm still director of medical testing regardless of what they think of my conclusions." A hint of defiance in her tone. "This is official data that should have been included in reports to General Peterson, but wasn't." "No, what reached Peterson was heavily edited, stripped of our most significant findings." Morrison pocketed the drive. "What exactly am I looking at?" "Neurological stress markers, significantly elevated in Excalibur crews compared to standard M1A2 operators. Concerning levels after just 8 hours of operation, potentially dangerous levels during extended exercises." "Caused by what?" "The digital interface systems, sensory overload from multiple screens and artificial visual inputs. The human brain wasn't designed to process battlefield information that way." "Effects on performance?" "Delayed reaction times, degraded decision-making, increased error rates." Sarah's voice hardened. "In combat, that translates to casualties, dead crews." "Who blocked this data from the official reports?" "That's where it gets interesting. The order came through normal administrative channels, but originated from General Reynolds' office. The same General Reynolds pressuring Peterson about my investigation." "Exactly." Sarah looked around to ensure no one was within earshot. "There's more. The USB contains an email chain showing Quantum Defense was informed of our medical findings 5 months ago. They acknowledged the issue, but classified it as acceptable operational risk and continued development without addressing it." "Acceptable to whom? Not to the soldiers who'll stake their lives on this vehicle?" "Precisely why I brought this to you." Sarah checked her watch. "I need to return to the Pentagon. My absence will be noticed." "One more question. Has there been pressure on you directly?" A flicker of hesitation. "My department's funding has been cut by 40%. My security clearance review has been delayed indefinitely. And my performance evaluation has suddenly become an issue after 8 years of exemplary ratings." "Retaliation?" "Absolutely. But they can't fire me without cause. Not yet anyway." Sarah moved toward the exit, then paused. "Jack, do you remember what you told me during Desert Storm? After the battle at Albergan? Remind me." "You said the most dangerous weapon isn't the one the enemy fires at you. It's the one your own side sends you into battle with if it doesn't work as promised." Morrison nodded slowly. "Still true. Be careful, Jack. There's too much money at stake for them to let one retired colonel derail Excalibur." She touched his arm briefly, then walked away, disappearing among the tourists. Morrison remained for several minutes, contemplating Lincoln's stoic expression. The great president had faced his own battles against entrenched corruption, against powerful interests who placed profit above human lives. As Morrison descended the memorial steps, he spotted a man in a dark suit, military bearing despite civilian clothes, watching too intently, trying too hard to appear casual. Surveillance, professional but not invisible to experienced eyes. Morrison changed course, entered the crowded National Mall, used a group of tourists as cover to reach Constitution Avenue, flagged a taxi to Georgetown. In a small coffee shop, he connected the USB drive to his secure laptop. Reviewed the medical data Sarah had provided. The evidence was damning. Neurological stress indicators far exceeded acceptable levels during extended operations. Cognitive function tests showed marked degradation after relatively short periods using Excalibur's digital interfaces. More concerning was the email chain between Quantum Defense and military acquisition officials. Clear acknowledgement of the medical issues, clear decisions to proceed despite those issues, clear instructions to minimize findings in official reports. Names appeared that surprised Morrison, General Reynolds certainly, but also Congressman Howard Mitchell. chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, a man with significant defense industry ties. Most damning was an email from Admiral Blackwood himself. Cost of redesign to address neurological stress issues would exceed $400 and delay production by minimum 18 months. Unacceptable to shareholders and congressional sponsors. Classify as training adaptation issue rather than design flaw. Human lives reduced to budget line items. Soldier safety sacrifice for shareholder value. Morrison downloaded the files to an encrypted drive. Removed the original USB. He needed more allies, more evidence. A congressman tied to Excalibur's approval was beyond his reach. A three-star general likewise. He needed media attention, needed public scrutiny of a program hidden behind classification and security protocols. His phone rang. The secure device Peterson had provided. Morrison answered cautiously. Yes, Colonel Morrison. A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. My name is Rebecca Lane, Washington Post Investigative Division. We haven't met, but I believe we share interests regarding Project Excalibur. Morrison remained silent, waiting. I've been investigating defense procurement irregularities for 18 months. Excalibur has appeared on my radar repeatedly. I understand from mutual acquaintances that you may have relevant information. What mutual acquaintances? I'm afraid I can't reveal sources, Colonel, but I assure you they're credible and well-placed. A pause. I'd like to meet, discuss our common interests. Morrison weighed the risks. A media alliance would provide pressure that military channels couldn't generate, but it could also derail his career and Peterson's. Could be perceived as violating security protocols. Or it could be a trap, an attempt to discredit him before he gathered sufficient evidence. How do I know you're who you claim to be? A fair question. You could check my byline at the Post. My recent series on defense contracting won the Pulitzer last year. Another pause. Or you could ask Sarah Baker about me. We attended Georgetown together. Morrison decided. Where and when? National Portrait Gallery. American President's Exhibition, 1 hour. The Portrait Gallery was crowded with weekend visitors. Morrison arrived early, positioned himself with clear sight lines to all entrances. He had verified Lane's identity online. Award-winning investigative journalist, specializing in defense and national security, reputation for thorough research and protection of sources. He spotted her immediately when she entered. Mid-40s, professional attire, alert eyes scanning the gallery with practiced efficiency. She carried a leather messenger bag, no obvious recording devices. Morrison approached directly. Ms. Lane, Colonel Morrison, thank you for coming. She gestured toward a quiet corner of the gallery. Shall we? They stood before Gilbert Stuart's Portrait of Washington. Other visitors maintained a respectful distance. I understand you're serving as special advisor on Project Excalibur, Lane began. I'm not at liberty to discuss classified programs, Ms. Lane. Of course. But you could hypothetically discuss procurement procedures, testing protocols, the proper handling of safety concerns. Her eyes held his. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, I believe in thorough testing of any system soldiers will stake their lives on. And if that thorough testing reveals problems, hypothetically, then those problems should be addressed before the system enters production or deployment. Lane nodded, satisfied with his careful answers. I've been investigating quantum defense for 14 months, Colonel. Their CEO, Richard Blackwood, has concerning connections to certain members of Congress, specifically those with oversight of defense procurement. That's not unusual in Washington. No, but combined with unusual stock transactions preceding major contract announcements, it becomes noteworthy. Lane lowered her voice. 3 members of the House Armed Services Committee purchased significant quantum stock 6 weeks before the Excalibur development contract was announced. Stock that has since increased in value reduced by 60%. That could be coincidence. Once perhaps, but I've documented 12 such coincidences involving quantum contracts over 5 years. She produced a thin folder. Would you like to see the evidence? Hypothetically, of course. Morrison accepted the folder. Inside were financial records, stock transactions, campaign contributions, a web of money connecting quantum defense to key decision-makers in Congress and the Pentagon. This is concerning, but not directly related to Excalibur's technical performance. No, but it establishes motive for rushing an immature system into production regardless of test results. Lane reclaimed the folder. My sources indicate there are significant performance issues with Excalibur, issues being concealed from oversight authorities. Morrison maintained a neutral expression. If such issues existed, properly documenting them through official channels would be the appropriate response. And if those official channels were compromised, if legitimate concerns were being suppressed, Lane studied him intently. What would a soldier with 40 years of service do then, Colonel? A man who's led troops into combat and understands what's at stake when equipment fails in battle? The question hung between them. Morrison considered his response carefully. Such a soldier would remember his oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, would place the lives of future soldiers above politics or personal advancement. Lane nodded, understanding his carefully worded answer. If such a soldier had documentation of testing irregularities or falsified reports, I would be interested in reviewing them, with appropriate protections for classified information naturally. Naturally, I protect my sources, Colonel, without exception. She produced a business card, plain white, only a phone number, no name. This line is secure if our hypothetical soldier ever wishes to continue this conversation. Morrison pocketed the card without comment. One more thing, Colonel. You're being watched. 2 men near the east entrance, another by the information desk. They followed you here, not very subtly, I might add. I'm aware. Be careful, Colonel. Quantum has significant resources and powerful friends. Lane moved toward the exit. Our hypothetical soldier isn't the first to raise concerns about their programs. His predecessors found their careers ended, their reputations damaged, their security clearances revoked. Noted, Morrison remained in the gallery for 20 minutes after Lane departed, contemplating the information she had provided. The financial connections between Quantum and congressional oversight, the pattern of insider trading preceding contract announcements. Combined with the technical and medical issues he had documented, a disturbing picture emerged. Not merely a flawed weapon system, but a corrupted procurement process, money and influence overriding soldier safety and combat effectiveness. When Morrison finally left the gallery, he made no attempt to evade surveillance. Let them follow. Let them report his movements. He had nothing to hide. And 2. His secure phone rang again as he walked toward the metro station. Unknown number. Morrison. Colonel, this is Senator David Chen, Texas Armed Services Committee. Do you have a moment? Morrison felt a surge of recognition. Senator Chen, former tank commander himself, Silver Star recipient from the First Iraq War, known for his aggressive oversight of defense programs. Yes, Senator. I understand you're evaluating the Excalibur program. As a former tanker myself, I have concerns about its readiness for production. My office has received disturbing reports from testing personnel. I'm not at liberty to discuss classified programs, Senator. Of course. But perhaps we could meet informally. Discuss general issues in tank development. Historical lessons from past programs. Chen's voice carried the unmistakable cadence of a man accustomed to command. Say tomorrow morning? My office at the Hart Building? I'd be honored, Senator. Excellent. Oh, and Colonel, I recommend varying your route tomorrow. Your current surveillance team is fairly obvious, but their replacements might show more skill. The call ended. Morrison continued toward the metro station. Awareness heightening, the circle was widening, new players emerging. Senator Chen was a powerful potential ally, a combat veteran with credibility both military and political, but his involvement raised the stakes significantly. Morrison spent the remainder of the day in his apartment, organizing information, cross-referencing test data with Sarah's medical findings, building a comprehensive picture of Excalibur's actual performance versus reported capabilities. The evidence was compelling. Systemic issues with electronic systems reliability, crew neurological stress far exceeding acceptable levels, autoloader malfunctions at rates that would render the main gun useless in extended combat operations. Most concerning was the pattern of official reports minimizing or completely omitting these issues. Clear evidence of deliberate falsification rather than oversight or misinterpretation. As darkness fell, Morrison noticed the surveillance team had been replaced. More professional now, less visible. He would not have spotted them without specifically looking. The message was clear. The opposition was escalating, becoming more serious, more determined. Morrison slept lightly, old combat habits returning, waking at small sounds, ready for threats. He rose before dawn, prepared for his meeting with Senator Chen. Following Chen's advice, Morrison took an elaborate route to Capitol Hill, taxi to bus, metro to a different bus, walking the final distance through crowded tourist areas. The Hart Senate office building imposed with its modern architecture. Different from the classical structures elsewhere on Capitol Hill, Morrison cleared security, was escorted to Chen's office on the third floor. The senator greeted him personally. Shorter than Morrison expected, but powerfully built despite his 60 years. The handshake firm, the eyes evaluating. Colonel Morrison, an honor to meet you. Your reputation in armor circles is legendary. The honor is mine, Senator. Your actions at 73 Easting are still taught at the armor school. Chen smiled briefly at the reference to his famous tank battle during Desert Storm. Ancient history now. Please sit. Coffee? They settled in a comfortable seating area away from Chen's desk. No staff present. An unusual level of privacy for a senatorial meeting. I'll be direct, Colonel. I've received concerning reports about Excalibur's testing program from multiple sources. As a former tank commander, I understand what's at stake when we field new systems. Chen leaned forward. What have you found? Morrison chose his words carefully. I've observed discrepancies between raw test data and official reporting, Senator. Significant issues minimized or omitted entirely. What kind of issues? Electronic systems reliability under combat conditions, crew neurological stress from the digital interfaces, autoloader malfunctions that render the main gun inoperable. Chen nodded, unsurprised. That matches reports I've received from Aberdeen test personnel, but I need more than anecdotal evidence to act officially. I understand, Senator. Do you have documentation, Colonel? Evidence that would withstand scrutiny? I'm compiling such evidence, Senator, but I must proceed through proper military channels initially. Of course. Chen studied him. But we both know those channels may be compromised in this case. When the time comes, my office stands ready to provide oversight support. Thank you, Senator. One more thing, Colonel. Quantum defense has powerful allies in Congress, including several of my colleagues on oversight committees. They will not appreciate scrutiny of Excalibur regardless of the evidence. I understand the political realities, Senator. Do you? Chen's expression hardened. Richard Blackwood contributed $15 million to congressional campaigns last cycle. He plays golf with the Secretary of Defense monthly. His company employs former military officers at seven-figure salaries. Influence peddling isn't new in Washington. No, but the scale has changed. The stakes have increased. Chen rose, moved to his window overlooking the Capitol. When I commanded tanks, Colonel, the most sophisticated technology was the ballistic computer. Now we build systems so complex that only their designers truly understand them. Complexity creates vulnerability, Senator. Precisely, both technical and ethical. Chen turned back toward Morrison. You're fighting an uphill battle, Colonel. Powerful interests have decided Excalibur will proceed regardless of test results. $14 billion now, likely $50 billion over the program's lifetime. The lives of tank crews outweigh any dollar figure, Senator. You and I believe that, Colonel, but we're soldiers. We've commanded men in combat, felt the weight of those decisions. Chen's voice lowered. Many making decisions about Excalibur have never worn a uniform, never sent men into harm's way, never written letters to families of the fallen. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, Chen offering his full support once Morrison had compiled definitive evidence of testing irregularities. An ally with significant political power, but one who understood the forces aligned against them. Morrison left the Hart building through a side entrance, immediately spotted surveillance. Two men in a sedan across Constitution Avenue, more professional than yesterday's team, but still visible to experienced eyes. His secure phone rang as he walked toward the Capitol South Metro station. Sarah Baker. Jack, we have a problem. Major Hayes has been arrested. Arrested? On what charges? Security violations, unauthorized access to classified materials. They seized his computers this morning, found evidence he transmitted test footage to you. How did they trace it? Internal network monitoring. They've had him under surveillance since he first raised concerns about Excalibur. Sarah's voice was tense, hurried. This isn't a simple administrative action, Jack. Criminal charges under the Espionage Act. 20 years minimum if convicted. Morrison felt cold anger rising. Hayes was a dedicated officer, had acted from conscience, from concern for future soldiers who would depend on Excalibur. Where is he being held? Military detention at Fort Belvoir, no visitors, no legal representation yet. That's not standard procedure. None of this is standard, Jack. They're sending a message to Hayes and to anyone else considering speaking out. Morrison processed this development. The opposition was escalating dramatically, moving from surveillance and pressure to direct legal action. treating legitimate testing concerns as criminal security violations. Jack, there's more. They're preparing similar charges against you. I have contacts in the Judge Advocate General's office. A case file has been opened. They're building a narrative that you're disgruntled about retirement, attempting to undermine Excalibur out of personal animosity. They're desperate. They're powerful, Jack, and they're moving faster than we anticipated. Sarah paused. I've been placed on administrative leave pending security review. My files have been seized, my access revoked. When? This morning. 8 armed security officers, military and quantum personnel together. Bitterness edged her voice. 20 years of exemplary service, thrown away because I documented medical issues they didn't want to address. Morrison made a decision. We need to accelerate our timeline, bring this into the open before they can complete their suppression efforts. How? They control all official channels. Not all channels. I've made contact with Rebecca Lane at the Washington Post, and Senator Chen has offered his support. Media exposure? That's risky, Jack. They'll claim you violated security protocols by speaking to a reporter. They're already building a case against me, Sarah, against Hayes, against you. Following established procedures hasn't worked. The system is compromised. Silence on the line as Sarah considered this. What do you need from me? Everything you've documented on crew medical issues, every email, every test result, every report that was altered or suppressed. I kept backups, encrypted, off-network. Good, we meet tonight. Compile everything, then I contact Lane. They're watching you, Jack, probably monitoring this call despite encryption. Let them watch. Let them listen. We have truth on our side, Sarah. They have money and influence. In the long run, truth is stronger. Morrison ended the call, continued toward the metro station, mind processing rapidly, developing strategy, anticipating opposition moves. The battle was shifting from quiet investigation to open conflict, from careful documentation to public exposure. Higher risks, higher stakes, but necessary given the escalating suppression efforts. That evening, Morrison met Sarah at a small restaurant in Alexandria, far from the Pentagon, far from official Washington. They sat in a corner booth, Sarah pale but determined. I've lost everything, Jack. My career, my security clearance, my reputation. No self-pity in her voice, just cold anger. 20 years of service, thrown away because I refused to falsify medical reports. You did the right thing, Sarah. The only thing a doctor and an officer could do. She handed him a small external hard drive. Everything I documented, original medical data, modified reports showing exactly what was changed, email chains identifying who ordered the modifications. Morrison pocketed the drive. This helps, but we need more. Hayes' testimony would be valuable. He's isolated, incommunicado. They're making an example of him. Perhaps, but Senator Chen has significant influence. Might be able to intervene. Sarah studied him across the table. You've changed, Jack. Since retirement. More willing to work outside traditional channels. Not changed, just focused on what matters. When I commanded tanks in combat, my priority was bringing my crews home alive. That hasn't changed, the battlefield has. And the enemy, not enemies, Sarah, misguided, corrupted perhaps, but still Americans, still serving what they believe are national interests. Even Blackwood, even Reynolds. Morrison considered this. They've lost perspective, placed program advancement and financial interests above soldier safety, but labeling them enemies closes doors to resolution. Sarah reached across the table, took his hand. That's why I followed you into this, Jack. Your moral compass doesn't waver, even when everything else turns upside down. The moment held between them, connection rekindling after 30 years. Then Sarah withdrew her hand, resumed professional distance. What's our next move? I meet with Lane tomorrow. Share what we've gathered. Chen will provide political coverage when the story breaks. And Peterson? He remains officially neutral for now, preserving his position and influence. He'll move when the time is right. As they prepared to leave, Sarah touched his arm. Be careful, Jack. They're desperate now. Desperate people take extreme measures. Morrison nodded, understanding the warning. The opposition had already demonstrated willingness to destroy careers, to file criminal charges against dedicated officers. What else might they attempt as their program faced exposure? He returned to his apartment by an indirect route, checking repeatedly for surveillance, finding none visible but assuming its presence regardless. Inside his apartment, Morrison connected Sarah's hard drive to his secure laptop, began reviewing the contents. The evidence was even more compelling than he had hoped. Original medical data showing dangerous neurological stress levels in Excalibur crews. Modified reports with those findings removed or minimized. Email chains documenting exactly who had ordered the modifications and why. Most damning was an email from General Reynolds himself. Ensure medical findings support program continuation. Negative results not acceptable at this stage. Adjust reporting accordingly. Direct evidence of a 3-star general ordering falsification of safety testing, potentially criminal, certainly career-ending if exposed. Morrison compiled the most significant documents. Prepared a briefing summarizing the findings. The case against Excalibur was becoming irrefutable. Not merely technical problems requiring correction, but deliberate falsification of safety testing, willful endangerment of future tank crews. As Morrison worked, his phone rang. The number unfamiliar. Morrison. Colonel, this is Rebecca Lane. We need to meet immediately. I've received information that changes everything. What kind of information? Not on the phone. The Jefferson Memorial. 1 hour. Come alone. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. Morrison agreed, ended the call, prepared to leave again. He transferred key documents to an encrypted thumb drive, left his apartment by the fire exit rather than the main entrance. The night was cool, clear, stars visible despite Washington's light pollution. Morrison approached the Jefferson Memorial carefully, alert for surveillance, for potential threats. The memorial was nearly deserted at this hour. A few tourists, a security guard making rounds. Morrison spotted Lane standing near Jefferson's statue, alone, tense. Ms. Lane. Colonel, thank you for coming. Her voice low, urgent. I've received documents from a source inside Quantum Defense, internal communications about suppressing Excalibur test results, similar to what I've already discovered. There's more. Lane glanced around nervously. Evidence of direct payments to military acquisition officials, offshore accounts, consulting contracts for family members, classic corruption patterns. That's beyond technical concerns. That's criminal conspiracy. Exactly. My source provided banking records, electronic fund transfers, meeting notes. Lane produced a thumb drive. It's all here, but publishing this will create a firestorm. I need to be certain the technical concerns are equally solid. They are. I've compiled extensive evidence of falsified test results, particularly regarding crew medical safety. Lane nodded. Then we proceed. I'll need your documentation, your testimony, on the record. Morrison hesitated. This step would likely end his career, would certainly provoke retaliation. But the evidence of corruption changed the equation. This was no longer about a flawed weapon system. This was about criminal conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of military procurement. You'll have my full cooperation, Ms. Lane, on the record. Good. My editors are prepared to publish within 48 hours. I'll need your documentation tomorrow. As they finalized arrangements, Morrison noticed a figure moving behind Lane. Male, athletic build, moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of a tourist. Morrison's combat instincts flared. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lane and the approaching figure. Ms. Lane, I believe we should continue this conversation elsewhere. Too late. The figure accelerated, hand emerging from his jacket, metal gleaming in the memorial's floodlights. Gun, Morrison shouted, shoved Lane aside, charged forward to close distance with the attacker. The weapon discharged, sound echoing through the memorial chamber. Morrison felt the round pass close, continued his advance. The attacker fired again. Morrison felt impact, sharp pain in his left shoulder, ignored it. Years of combat training took over. Morrison crashed into the attacker, grabbed the weapon hand, forced it upward, delivered a savage strike to the man's throat with his right fist. The attacker staggered, gasped for breath. Morrison maintained his grip on the weapon hand, twisted violently, felt bones break. The pistol clattered to the marble floor. Security guards responded to the gunshots, running toward the confrontation with weapons drawn. Tourists scattered, screaming. The attacker broke free of Morrison's grip, sprinted toward the memorial exit. Morrison started to pursue, then staggered as pain flared in his shoulder, blood spreading across his jacket. Lane was beside him instantly, supporting him. You're hit. Flesh wound. We need to secure that weapon. Evidence. Security guards surrounded them, weapons aimed at Morrison rather than pursuing the fleeing attacker. Confusion, shouting. Morrison trying to explain. blood loss making him lightheaded. Police arrived minutes later. Paramedics, Morrison attempting to communicate the importance of the weapon, the thumb drives, the evidence of corruption. Lane took charge, identified herself as a Washington Post reporter, explained they had been meeting to discuss government corruption when attacked, insisted the weapon be preserved as evidence, that Morrison receive immediate medical attention. The next hours passed in a blur for Morrison. Ambulance to George Washington University Hospital, emergency treatment, local anesthetic, wound cleaning and dressing. The bullet had passed through muscle in his left shoulder. Missed bone and major blood vessels. Painful but not life-threatening. As medical staff treated him, Morrison remained focused on the evidence, on the thumb drives, on the attack's implications. They had crossed a line, moved from career destruction and legal harassment to attempted murder. The opposition was desperate, dangerous, willing to take extreme measures to protect Excalibur and the corruption surrounding it. Police detectives interviewed Morrison in the treatment room. He provided a detailed description of the attacker, emphasized the professional nature of the assault. This was no random crime, no mugging gone wrong. This was a targeted attack on a specific meeting. The detectives seemed skeptical until Lane arrived. She had remained at the scene longer, had ensured the weapon was properly secured as evidence, had protected her thumb drive and the information it contained. "The ballistics will be interesting," she told Morrison after the detectives departed. "I'm betting that weapon has no registration, no traceable history. Professional job, absolutely, but not professional enough. You're still alive. The evidence is secure, and now we have proof of how far they'll go to protect their secrets." Morrison was released from the hospital near dawn, left arm in a sling, prescription painkillers untouched in his pocket. Pain was useful, kept the mind sharp, maintained focus. Lane drove him to the post's offices rather than his apartment. "You can't go back there, not now. They'll be watching, waiting." "Agreed, but I need to contact Peterson. Chen, let them know what's happened. You can use secure communications from our office. We have protocols for protecting sources under threat." The Washington Post building hummed with pre-dawn activity, early edition deadlines, digital updates. Lane escorted Morrison to a secure conference room, provided encrypted communication access. Morrison called Peterson first. The general answered immediately despite the early hour. "Jack, what happened? I just received reports about a shooting at the Jefferson Memorial. Attempted hit, Will, professional but rushed. I met with Rebecca Lane from the Post. Someone tried to prevent that meeting permanently." Silence on the line as Peterson absorbed this. "This changes everything, Jack. They've crossed the line from career harassment to attempted murder." "Agreed, and it confirms the significance of what we've uncovered. Lane has evidence of direct payments to acquisition officials. Corruption beyond technical falsification. Criminal conspiracy." Peterson's voice hardened. "Where are you now?" "Secure location, working with Lane to compile everything for publication." "Good. Stay there. I'm accelerating our timeline, taking our evidence directly to the Secretary of the Army today, bypassing Reynolds entirely." "He won't welcome that conversation, Will." "No, but an attempted murder of a decorated colonel changes the political calculus. He can't ignore this level of corruption, not with media exposure imminent." Next, Morrison contacted Senator Chen. The senator's reaction mirrored Peterson's. Shock at the escalation, determination to expose the conspiracy. "I'm calling an emergency session of my subcommittee, Colonel. Formal hearings on Excalibur procurement irregularities. Beginning tomorrow." "That's extremely fast, Senator." "Attempted murder of a key witness demands immediate response, Colonel. I've been building the groundwork for weeks based on what sources at Aberdeen have provided. Your evidence will be the cornerstone, but not the only support." Morrison finished his calls, returned to work with Lane. They spent hours compiling evidence from multiple sources: technical test falsification, medical safety concerns, financial corruption, a comprehensive picture of a procurement process compromised at multiple levels. By mid-morning, Lane's editors had reviewed the material, had consulted with legal counsel, had made the decision to publish. "Tomorrow's front page, Colonel." Lane looked exhausted but determined. "Digital release tonight at midnight. Every major news outlet in the country will follow our lead by morning. The Pentagon will deny everything, claim national security concerns prevent full disclosure. Let them. We have documents, we have testimony, we have financial records." Lane managed a tired smile. And now we have attempted murder of a decorated war hero investigating corruption. The public relations battle is already lost for them. Morrison nodded, understanding the media dynamics. The technical issues with Excalibur might not capture public attention. The financial corruption might generate temporary outrage. But the attempted murder of a Silver Star recipient investigating military procurement fraud, that narrative would dominate news cycles for weeks. What happens now, he asked. You rest here in our secure facilities. Lane gestured toward an adjoining room with a couch. We have security protocols for threatened sources, armed guards, restricted access. And you? I finish writing the story that will end Excalibur and expose corruption reaching into the highest levels of defense procurement. Lane's expression was grim, determined. The story that nearly got us both killed last night. Morrison settled on the couch in the adjoining room, left arm throbbing despite medication, mind racing despite exhaustion. Events were accelerating, moving beyond his control, beyond anyone's control now. Peterson taking evidence directly to the secretary, Chen convening emergency hearings, Lane publishing a comprehensive exposure of corruption and falsification. All within the next 24 hours. The opposition would respond, desperately, aggressively, would attempt to discredit witnesses, classify evidence, invoke national security, perhaps worse given their previous escalation of violence. Morrison closed his eyes, not to sleep but to organize his thoughts, to prepare for what would come next. The most important battle of his career. Not fought with tanks and shells, but with information and testimony. A battle for the lives of future tank crews, for the integrity of the procurement system that provided them equipment, for the fundamental principle that soldier safety outweighed profit and career advancement. Iron Jack Morrison had commanded tanks in 3 wars, had faced enemy armor across battlefields on 2 continents, had made life and death decisions under fire. This final battle might be his most important, his most consequential. Not for his own survival, but for the young men and women who would someday stake their lives on the tanks America provided them. One more fight, perhaps his last, but one worth every sacrifice it demanded. Chapter 6, Mounting Pressure. The Washington Post headline exploded across America's consciousness at midnight. Digital release first, then morning papers nationwide. Corruption and cover-up. $14 billion tank program compromised. The subheading was equally dramatic. Decorated colonel shot investigating falsified safety tests. Congressional hearings convened. Morrison read the article on a tablet in the Post's secure room. Lane had done masterful work. Technical issues explained in accessible language. Financial corruption documented with banking records and email evidence. The attempted murder described in dramatic but accurate detail. Most powerful were the human elements. Major Hayes arrested for exposing safety concerns. Sarah Baker's career destroyed for documenting medical risk to tank crews. Morrison himself shot while investigating corruption that placed future soldiers at risk. Heroes and villains clearly defined. A narrative the public could understand and engage with emotionally. Morrison's secure phone rang minutes after digital publication. Peterson. It started, Jack. The secretary has ordered a complete suspension of the Excalibur program pending investigation. Reynolds has been placed on administrative leave. FBI agents are securing quantum defense offices nationwide. How bad is the reaction? Nuclear. White House involvement now. Congressional leadership demanding briefings. Defense contractors in panic mode wondering which program gets exposed next. Peterson sounded exhausted but satisfied. You were right, Jack. The system was too compromised for internal correction. Needed external pressure. And Hayes, Sarah? Hayes has been released from detention. All charges dropped. Official recognition of his service to procurement integrity being prepared. Peterson chuckled darkly. Amazing how quickly they create new narratives when the old one collapses. And Sarah? Reinstated, full access. Her medical documentation is now central to the investigation. Morrison felt relief flood through him. Hayes and Sarah had risked everything to expose the truth. Had suffered professional destruction for their integrity. Now vindication. What's next, Will? Congressional hearings start in 4 hours. Senator Chen's subcommittee. You're the lead witness. Then me. Then Hayes and Sarah. Technical experts afterward. Peterson paused. They'll attack you, Jack. Try to undermine your credibility. Question your motives. Suggest you violated security protocols. I'm prepared. I know you are. Just remember what's at stake. Not your reputation, not your career. The lives of tank crews who will depend on whatever replaces Excalibur. I haven't forgotten. Morrison hung up, prepared himself mentally for the hearings, for the public scrutiny, for the hostile questioning that would come from Excalibur's defenders. Lane entered with coffee and breakfast. Dark circles under her eyes, evidence of an all-night writing session. Your story has crashed our website 3 times already, Colonel. Server overload from traffic volume. The technical issues are complex. Will the public understand what's at stake? The public understands corruption, understands attempted murder of a war hero. The technical details matter less than the human story. Lane settled into a chair, sipped her coffee. Speaking of which, you should prepare for sudden fame. Silver Star recipient shot investigating corruption makes compelling television. I'm not interested in fame, Ms. Lane, only in protecting future tank crews. I know, Colonel. That's why your testimony will be so powerful. Absolute moral clarity tends to resonate with the public. Morrison's next call came from Senator Chen. Colonel, I'm sending a security detail to escort you to the hearings. Capitol Police. Trust them exclusively. Understood, Senator? The opposition is in disarray, but still dangerous. Quantum stock has fallen 60% since midnight. Billions in shareholder value evaporated. Blackwood himself is facing potential criminal charges. Desperate people take desperate action, Senator. Precisely why the security detail. The witnesses who exposed this corruption are now our highest priority for protection. The Capitol Police detail arrived within the hour. Professional, vigilant. They escorted Morrison from the post building through crowds of reporters, camera flashes, shouted questions. Morrison maintained silence, focused on the testimony ahead. The journey to Capitol Hill passed without incident. Morrison was escorted to a private room to await his appearance before Chen's subcommittee. Sarah Baker was already there, along with Major Hayes. Both appeared exhausted but determined. Colonel, Hayes snapped to attention despite his civilian clothes. At ease, Major, we're long past formalities. Sarah embraced him carefully, mindful of his wounded shoulder. I heard about the shooting. Are you all right? I've had worse from a shaving. Morrison managed a thin smile. How are you both holding up? Relieved. Hayes exhaled heavily. 24 hours ago, I was in a cell facing espionage charges. Now I'm a star witness in congressional hearings. Washington changes direction quickly when evidence becomes irrefutable. Sarah nodded. My security clearance has been reinstated. My medical findings are now central to the investigation. As if they hadn't spent months suppressing those exact findings. The important thing is the truth is emerging. Future tank crews will be protected from a flawed system. They spent the next hour comparing notes, ensuring their testimony aligned without appearing rehearsed. The technical issues were complex, needed clear articulation for non-military committee members to understand. A staff member appeared. Colonel Morrison, they're ready for you. The hearing room was packed, committee members arrayed on raised platforms. Staff behind them, media organizations with cameras at the back. Public seating areas filled with spectators. Military officers, defense contractors, ordinary citizens drawn by the scandal's dramatic elements. Morrison was escorted to the witness table, sworn informally. Senator Chen opened the proceedings with a grave statement about procurement integrity and soldier safety. Then questioning began. Most committee members were respectful, asked detailed questions about Excalibur's technical issues, about the falsification of test results, about the retaliation against those who raised legitimate concerns. Morrison answered with military precision, detailed technical explanations when necessary, simple direct language when possible, always returning to the fundamental issue, soldier safety compromised for program advancement and financial gain. Then came the hostile questions, from senators with defense contractors in their states, with campaign contributions from Quantum and similar firms. Colonel Morrison, isn't it true that you were passed over for promotion to general before your retirement? Senator Williams from Georgia. Quantum facilities in his district. No, Senator. I retired at my planned 20-year mark as a colonel, never sought flag rank. But you harbored resentment about the Army's modernization direction, preferred traditional tank designs over next-generation systems like Excalibur. I prefer systems that work as promised, Senator, that protect their crews rather than endangering them. You've potentially violated numerous security protocols by sharing classified information with the press, Colonel. Aren't you concerned about the damage to national security? Morrison leaned forward, voice steady. I'm concerned about American soldiers dying in burning tanks, Senator. About systems rushed to production despite known flaws. About safety tests falsified to protect profits rather than crews. Williams persisted. You've made serious allegations against distinguished officers, Colonel, against patriotic American companies, without allowing them proper opportunity to respond. I've documented test falsification, Senator, provided evidence of safety concerns deliberately hidden from oversight authorities, evidence of financial improprieties reaching into the highest levels of defense procurement. Morrison held the senator's gaze. These aren't allegations. They're facts, supported by documentation, by testimony from multiple sources, by medical evidence showing Excalibur endangers its crews through neurological stress alone. The questioning continued for 2 hours. Morrison remained calm, factual, returning always to the central issue: soldier safety compromise for financial and career advancement. As the session concluded, Senator Chen addressed Morrison directly. Colonel, you've served your country with distinction for 40 years, led troops in combat, been wounded both in war and now in pursuit of procurement integrity. Chen's voice carried genuine respect. On behalf of this committee, I thank you for your continued service to the nation and to the soldiers who depend on the equipment we provide them. Morrison was escorted from the hearing room through crowds of reporters, back to the waiting area where Sarah and Hayes watched the proceedings on monitors. You were magnificent, Jack. Sarah squeezed his hand, absolutely unshakable. They barely laid a glove on you, sir, Hayes added. The technical evidence is too solid for political deflection. Morrison sank into a chair, shoulder throbbing. Your testimonies will reinforce that. This isn't about politics or personalities. It's about a fundamentally flawed system that would have endangered tank crews. Peterson arrived as Sarah prepared for her testimony. The general looked haggard, aged years and days, but his eyes showed satisfaction. The secretary has ordered a complete review of all quantum defense contracts, Jack. Not just Excalibur, FBI financial crimes units are pouring through records, following money trails. How high does the corruption reach, Will? We don't know yet, but Reynolds wasn't acting alone. The financial incentives were too broadly distributed, too systematic. Peterson shook his head. This may be the largest procurement scandal since Darlene Druyun. Sarah's testimony focused on the medical evidence, the neurological stress caused by Excalibur's digital interfaces, the deliberate suppression of those findings in official reports, the retaliation she faced for maintaining scientific integrity. Hayes followed with technical details: software failures during electronic warfare tests, autoloader malfunctions, drive system vulnerabilities. His arrest and detention for exposing these issues. By day's end, the case against Excalibur was overwhelming. Technical flaws documented by multiple witnesses. Medical safety issues clearly established. Financial corruption exposed through banking records and email evidence. Most damning was the systematic suppression of test results, the deliberate falsification of reports to oversight authorities, the retaliation against dedicated professionals who tried to protect future tank crews. As Morrison left the Capitol with his security detail, media swarmed around him. Questions shouted from every direction. He maintained silence. Let the testimony speak for itself. The car, provided by Senator Chen's office, delivered Morrison to a secure hotel rather than his compromised apartment. Additional security posted in the lobby. Outside his room, the threat level remained high despite the public exposure. Inside his hotel room, Morrison finally allowed exhaustion to overtake him. Shoulder wound throbbing despite medication. Mind racing despite fatigue. The battle wasn't over. Powerful interests had been damaged but not destroyed. Careers ruined. Stock values decimated. Criminal charges pending. Such interests would respond, would seek revenge, would attempt to reconstruct narratives that shifted blame, protected reputations, maintained power. Morrison slept fitfully, woke to breaking news alerts on his phone. Blackwood resigning as Quantum CEO. General Reynolds announcing immediate retirement. Congressional leaders calling for comprehensive procurement reform. The system responding, adapting, creating new narratives that acknowledge problems while protecting broader institutional interests. By morning, the media coverage had shifted, from exposing corruption to exploring solutions, from identifying villains to debating procurement reform, the natural evolution of a breaking scandal. Morrison's secure phone rang as he watched news coverage. Senator Chen. Colonel, the subcommittee is drafting comprehensive legislation, procurement reform focused on technical testing integrity, medical safety standards for crew interfaces, whistleblower protections. That's encouraging, Senator. We'd like your input, Colonel. Your experience is invaluable in crafting meaningful reform rather than cosmetic changes. I'd be honored to contribute, Senator. Excellent. My staff will coordinate with you. Chen paused. One more thing, Colonel. The FBI has identified the man who shot you, former Special Forces, recently employed by a security contractor with ties to quantum defense. Has he been apprehended? Not yet, but his accounts show a $500,000 deposit the day before the attempt. They're tracking the source. Morrison absorbed this information. Professional hit attempt confirmed, not random violence, not overzealous security, a deliberate assassination order with significant financial backing. Colonel, I'd like you to remain under protection until this individual is apprehended. The threat remains active. Understood, Senator. I have no desire to make their job easier. After Chen's call, Morrison received another, from Peterson. Jack, the secretary, has authorized a complete redesign of our next-generation tank program, starting from first principles rather than building on Excalibur's flawed foundation. That's welcome news, Will. He wants you to head the requirements committee, Jack, defining what the new system must deliver, what it must prioritize, how it should be tested. Morrison hadn't expected this, had anticipated his military career ending with the congressional testimony, with the public exposure of classified programs regardless of justification. I'm retired, Will, and likely controversial after these hearings, which is precisely why you're perfect for this role, Jack. You've demonstrated absolute commitment to soldier safety above politics or career advancement. Your integrity is unquestionable. There will be opposition, less than you might expect. The scandal has created demand for visible reform, for unimpeachable integrity in the replacement program. Peterson chuckled softly. You've become a symbol, Jack. The decorated colonel wounded while exposing corruption that endangered soldiers. Not a role I sought, Will. No, but one you've earned through 40 years of service, through unwavering commitment to the troops under your command, through moral courage when facing institutional pressure. Morrison considered the offer. Leading the requirements committee would mean returning from retirement, engaging with the defense establishment, a nation he had recently challenged, navigating political pressures while maintaining technical integrity. But it would also mean direct influence over the system that would eventually replace Excalibur, ensuring it prioritized soldier safety and combat effectiveness over corporate profits or bureaucratic convenience. I'll do it, Will, on one condition. Name it. Hayes and Sarah joined the committee. Their technical and medical expertise is invaluable, and they've demonstrated the moral courage to stand against institutional pressure. Already arranged, Jack. The secretary specifically requested their participation, along with other testing personnel who raised concerns about Excalibur. Then I accept. Excellent. We'll arrange formal appointment once the congressional hearings conclude. For now, continue cooperating with Chen's committee. Help shape the procurement reforms they're drafting. The next days passed in a blur of testimony and consultation. Morrison working with Chen's staff on procurement reform legislation, meeting with other whistleblowers from the Excalibur program, reviewing technical alternatives to Excalibur's flawed systems. Media attention remained intense but shifted focus, from scandal exposure to reform proposals, from corruption to correction. Morrison gave limited interviews, focused on technical issues rather than personal drama, emphasized the importance of systems that protected their crews rather than endangering them. A week after the initial exposure, Morrison met with Sarah and Hayes in a secure conference room at the Pentagon. Both had been formally reinstated with commendations for their integrity. Both had accepted roles on the new Tank Requirements Committee. We've been offered redemption, Sarah observed, not just personally, but for the entire procurement system. Redemption requires more than new committees or legislation, Morrison replied. It requires cultural change, prioritizing soldier safety above program momentum or financial interests. Can we achieve that, sir? Hayes looked skeptical. The forces that corrupted Excalibur remain powerful. Defense contractors, political interests, career advancement incentives. We can shift the balance, Major, create stronger technical testing protocols, better whistleblower protections, more transparent reporting systems. Morrison leaned forward, and most importantly, demonstrate that integrity ultimately prevails despite institutional pressure. Sarah smiled. The warrior philosopher emerges. Just an old tank commander who's seen what happens when equipment fails in combat, when crews stake their lives on systems that don't perform as promised. Their discussion continued. Technical requirements for the replacement program. Lessons learned from Excalibur's failures. Procurement reforms to prevent similar corruption. As they finished, Peterson joined them. The general appeared more relaxed than Morrison had seen him since this began. The weight of hidden corruption lifted from his shoulders. The FBI made an arrest this morning, the shooter from the Jefferson Memorial. He's cooperating with investigators in exchange for consideration and sentencing. Has he identified who ordered the hit? Morrison asked. Not yet, but the financial trail leads directly to offshore accounts linked to quantum executives. The investigation is ongoing. Justice takes time. Morrison had never expected immediate resolution, complete accountability. The systems involved were too complex, the interests too powerful. The important thing is the pattern has been exposed. Future procurement will face greater scrutiny, stronger safeguards. Peterson nodded. The Secretary has formally approved your appointment to head the Requirements Committee, Jack. Effective immediately despite your retired status. Special dispensation given the circumstances. I'm honored to serve in this capacity. The first task is defining alternatives to Excalibur's flawed systems, particularly the digital interfaces and autoloader mechanisms that presented the most serious safety concerns. Morrison considered this. We don't need revolutionary systems, Will. We need evolutionary improvements to proven platforms, systems that prioritize crew survivability and combat effectiveness over technological novelty. The defense industry won't welcome that perspective, Colonel. Hayes smiled slightly. They prefer selling revolutionary new platforms rather than incremental improvements to existing systems. They'll adapt, Major. The market has changed. Procurement reform is coming. Technical testing integrity is now political priority rather than bureaucratic inconvenience. Sarah leaned forward. What about the neurological stress issues I documented? The fundamental problems with digital-only interfaces? We incorporate your findings from the beginning. Design interfaces that balance digital enhancement with direct vision systems that accommodate human cognitive limitations rather than ignoring them. Peterson nodded approval. That's why you're perfect for this role, Jack. You understand both the technical requirements and the human elements, the machines and the men who operate them. As the meeting concluded, Morrison felt a sense of proper closure forming. Not complete justice, perhaps. The systems were too complex for that. The interests too powerful for full accountability. But meaningful reform, increased oversight, technical testing with genuine integrity rather than predetermined outcomes. Most importantly, protection for future tank crews, systems designed around their capabilities and limitations. Tested rigorously before deployment, evaluated honestly regardless of program momentum or financial interest. One battle ended, another beginning. Iron Jack Morrison had fought for his country across 3 wars, had commanded tanks on 2 continents, had led men into combat knowing some wouldn't return. This final battle might prove his most significant contribution, not on distant battlefields, but in procurement systems and testing protocols. In the unglamorous but vital work of ensuring American soldiers had equipment worthy of their courage when facing the ultimate test of combat. Morrison left the Pentagon that evening with Sarah beside him, his wounded shoulder healing, his sense of purpose renewed. What happens now, Jack? She asked as they walked toward the river entrance. We build something better, more honest, more focused on the soldiers who stake their lives on the equipment we provide them. And us? After 30 years? Morrison took her hand. We build something there too, if you're willing. Her smile provided the answer. A second chance. Redemption not just for procurement systems, but for lives interrupted by war and duty and the long separation of years. The battle for Excalibur had ended. The war for procurement integrity continued. But for the first time in decades, Jack Morrison looked toward the future with something beyond duty, beyond obligation, beyond the next mission. He had fought his final battle as a commander, had exposed corruption that threatened future soldiers, had helped initiate reforms that would protect tank crews not yet born. Now perhaps he had earned something for himself, a life beyond duty, beyond service, beyond the eternal vigilance that had defined his military career. Iron Jack Morrison stepped into the Washington evening, wounded but unbowed, retired but engaged, his most important contribution to his country perhaps still to come. In the distance, the Capitol dome gleamed in the setting sun, symbol of the democracy he had served for 40 years. Imperfect but resilient, capable of correction when corruption was exposed to light, like the man himself. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center stood as a monument to both the cost and resilience of American military service. Sunlight streamed through the windows of room 437, where Colonel James Morrison sat propped up in bed. The bullet wound in his shoulder throbbed despite medication, a small price compared to what others had paid in service to their country. Morrison studied the morning papers spread across his lap. Front-page headlines nationwide. Congressional hearings into Excalibur procurement fraud. Quantum defense stock in freefall. General Reynolds announcing sudden retirement. Admiral Blackwood resigning as Quantum CEO. The story had exploded beyond containment. Sarah Baker entered carrying coffee. Her presence had been constant since his admission 3 days ago. Professional concern mixed with something deeper. Something rekindled after 30 years. The doctors say you're healing remarkably well for a man of your advanced years. She smiled as she handed him the coffee. Tank commanders are notoriously difficult to kill. Ask the Iraqis. I've been monitoring your neurological indicators. No sign of post-traumatic stress from the shooting. Your recovery metrics exceed expectations. Always the doctor. It's who I am, Jack. She settled into the chair beside his bed. Just as you're always the commander, even from a hospital bed. Morrison nodded toward the papers. The system is responding, adapting, creating new narratives that acknowledge corruption while protecting broader institutions. Is that cynicism I hear? Realism. The defense procurement system is too vast for complete reform based on one scandal. No matter how dramatic. Morrison sipped his coffee. But we've created an opening, a moment when meaningful change is possible. His secure phone rang. Senator Chen. Colonel, how are you feeling? Ready to continue the fight, Senator? Excellent. The subcommittee has scheduled a special session tomorrow. Your testimony from the hospital, if doctors permit. Live video feed to the hearing room. I'll be there, Senator. Whatever it takes. Good. We're building momentum for comprehensive procurement reform. Your direct testimony on Excalibur's technical flaws remains our strongest evidence. After Chen's call, Sarah studied Morrison with professional concern. Are you certain you're ready for more testimony? Your body needs rest to heal properly. Some battles can't wait for convenient timing, Sarah. Morrison shifted position, winced as pain flared in his shoulder. Young men and women will stake their lives on the equipment we provide them, on the systems we certify as combat ready. Always the mission first. Always. Morrison met her gaze. It's who I am. The door opened. Rebecca Lane entered carrying a leather portfolio. The journalist looked exhausted but triumphant. Her Washington Post expose had ignited a national scandal. Colonel, you're looking better than when I last saw you. Less bleeding tends to improve one's appearance, Ms. Lane. She smiled briefly. The Post is preparing a follow-up investigative series. The corruption extends beyond Excalibur to multiple defense procurement programs. Not surprising, the systemic pressures that corrupted Excalibur exist throughout defense acquisition. Exactly, we found evidence of similar testing irregularities in aircraft systems, missile defense, naval vessels. Lane opened her portfolio. Financial connections linking defense contractors to congressional oversight. Revolving door employment between Pentagon acquisition and private industry. Morrison nodded. The military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned about 60 years ago. But now with greater financial scale, less effective oversight, more sophisticated methods of influence. Their discussion continued. Morrison providing context on military procurement from his decades of experience. Lane sharing findings from her ongoing investigation. Together building a comprehensive picture of systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed Excalibur's corruption to flourish. Sarah watched their interaction with professional interest. You two make a formidable team, military experience and journalistic instinct. Different backgrounds, but shared commitment to truth, Ms. Baker. Lane closed her portfolio. Speaking of which, the FBI has made progress identifying who ordered the hit on Colonel Morrison. What have they found? Morrison leaned forward despite his pain. The shooter is cooperating in exchange for sentencing considerations. Claims he was hired through intermediaries but has provided banking details. The financial trail leads to offshore accounts with connections to senior quantum defense executives. Not surprising. Desperate people take desperate actions when billions are at stake. Lane's expression hardened. Attempted murder of a decorated veteran investigating procurement fraud goes beyond desperation, Colonel. It reflects a system that believes itself beyond accountability, beyond law. A belief we're currently challenging, Ms. Lane. Successfully thus far. She checked her watch. I should go. My editors are waiting for the next installment. The Post is committed to this story, Colonel, to exposing not just Excalibur's failures, but the systemic issues that allowed them. After Lane departed, Morrison turned to Sarah. What do the doctors actually say about my condition? That you're healing well but need rest. That testifying tomorrow pushes medical recommendations. But not beyond what's possible. She sighed. No, not beyond what's possible, just beyond what's advisable. Then we proceed. Some battles can't wait for full recovery. Sarah squeezed Wanda's hand, understanding if not entirely approving. The warrior ethos remains intact, I see. It's kept me alive through 3 wars, Sarah, through battles across 2 continents, through an assassination attempt in our nation's capital. The remainder of the day passed in preparation. Morrison working with Senator Chen's staff via secure video conference, reviewing technical documentation, preparing responses to anticipated questions, building the case for procurement reform beyond Excalibur itself. As evening approached, Lieutenant General Peterson arrived. The strain of recent weeks evident in his face, but his posture remained military straight, unbending despite pressure. You're looking better than expected, Jack. Rumors of my demise were greatly exaggerated, Will. Peterson settled into the visitor's chair. The secretary sends his regards and his gratitude for your service exposing Excalibur's flaws. Gratitude is welcome, action more so. Action is coming. The secretary has suspended all quantum defense contracts pending comprehensive review. FBI financial crimes units are examining procurement records across multiple programs. Senator Chen's subcommittee is drafting reform legislation with broad bipartisan support. Morrison nodded, satisfied with these initial steps but aware of their limitations. And Excalibur itself? Terminated completely. The technical flaws you and Hayes documented made continuation impossible once exposed to proper scrutiny. What replaces it? Our forces still need next-generation armor capabilities. Peterson smiled slightly. That's where you come in, Jack. The secretary wants you to head the requirements committee for the replacement program. Define what the new system must deliver, how it should be tested, what it must prioritize. Morrison hadn't anticipated this development, had expected his military career to end with the congressional testimony, with the public exposure of classified problems regardless of justification. I'm retired, Will, and controversial after these hearings, which is precisely why you're perfect for this role. You've demonstrated absolute commitment to soldier safety above politics or career advancement. Your integrity is unquestionable. There will be opposition, less than you might expect. The scandal has created demand for visible reform, for unimpeachable integrity in the replacement program. Peterson leaned forward. You've become a symbol, Jack. The decorated colonel wounded while exposing corruption that endangered soldiers. Not a role I sought, Will. No, but one you've earned through 40 years of service, through unwavering commitment to the troops under your command, through moral courage when facing institutional pressure. Morrison considered the offer. Leading the requirements committee would mean returning from retirement, engaging with the defense establishment he had recently challenged, navigating political pressures while maintaining technical integrity. But it would also mean direct influence over the system that would eventually replace Excalibur, ensuring it prioritized soldier safety and combat effectiveness over corporate profits or bureaucratic convenience. I'll do it, Will, on one condition. Name it. Hayes and Sarah joined the committee. Their technical and medical expertise is invaluable, and they've demonstrated the moral courage to stand against institutional pressure. Already arranged, Jack. The secretary specifically requested their participation, along with other testing personnel who raised concerns about Excalibur. Then I accept. Peterson rose to leave, placed a hand on Morrison's uninjured shoulder. Get some rest, old friend. Tomorrow's testimony is important, but your long-term contribution will be more significant still. After Peterson departed, Sarah returned, found Morrison reviewing technical documents despite the late hour. You should be resting. I'll rest when the mission is complete. She took the documents from his hands, set them aside firmly. The mission continues tomorrow, Colonel, and you need sleep to perform effectively. Morrison surrendered to her professional authority, recognized the wisdom in her concern. You always did know how to manage stubborn tank commanders. Someone has to. Otherwise, you drive yourselves to exhaustion through sheer determination. Her voice softened. It's what makes you effective in battle and challenging as patience. Morrison slept better than expected. The pain medication finally accepted. The knowledge that progress was being made allowing some measure of relaxation. Morning brought preparation for testimony. Medical staff checking his condition. Technical support establishing secure video connection to the hearing room. Sarah ensuring his comfort and monitoring his vital signs. At precisely 1000 hours, the video feed activated. Morrison found himself looking into the Senate hearing room, committee members arrayed on their dais, staff behind them, media and spectators filling available spaces. Senator Chen opened proceedings. Today we continue our investigation into procurement irregularities surrounding Project Excalibur. Our first witness appears remotely from Walter Reed Medical Center, where he is recovering from wounds sustained while investigating this matter. Colonel James Morrison has served his country with distinction for 40 years, including combat commands in 3 conflicts. Colonel, we appreciate your willingness to testify despite your condition. Morrison's testimony proceeded methodically. Technical details of Excalibur's flaws, documentation of falsified testing, evidence of institutional pressure to suppress legitimate safety concerns, the system that had evolved to prioritize program momentum over soldier safety. Most committee members asked respectful questions, seeking understanding rather than confrontation. But some defenders of traditional procurement systems remained. Colonel Morrison, Senator Williams began, "You've made serious allegations against distinguished military leaders and American defense corporations. Allegations that have already damaged national security by undermining public confidence in our defense acquisition processes. I've documented facts, Senator, provided evidence of testing irregularities, of safety concerns deliberately hidden from oversight authorities, of retaliation against dedicated professionals who attempted to protect future tank crews." Morrison's voice remained steady, authoritative. "These aren't allegations. They're established facts confirmed by multiple witnesses and extensive documentation. Facts interpreted through your personal lens, Colonel. A lens perhaps colored by resistance to modernization, by preference for traditional systems over next-generation technology." Morrison leaned toward the camera. "My preference, Senator, is for systems that work as promised, that protect their crews rather than endangering them, that deliver combat effectiveness rather than shareholder value." The questioning continued for 2 hours, Morrison maintaining focus despite pain and fatigue, returning always to the fundamental issue: soldier safety compromise for program advancement and financial gain. As testimony concluded, Senator Chen addressed him directly. "Colonel Morrison, your service to this nation extends beyond the battlefields where you've led troops with distinction. Your moral courage in exposing these procurement irregularities, despite personal risk, demonstrates the highest traditions of military service. On behalf of this committee and a grateful nation, I thank you." When the video feed terminated, Morrison sank back against his pillows, exhausted but satisfied. The technical case against Excalibur was now irrefutable. The need for procurement reform established beyond political deflection. Sarah checked his vital signs, concern evident in her expression. "Your blood pressure is elevated, pain indicators increasing. You need rest, Jack. The mission required completion. The mission continues, but not at the expense of your recovery." Her professional manner softened slightly. "You've done your part, Jack. Others will carry it forward now." Morrison recognized the wisdom in her words, allowed the medication she administered to take effect, permitted himself rest after battle. The warrior's discipline, accepting that recovery, was itself a mission requirement. As consciousness faded, he felt Sarah's hand in his. Connection transcending professional concern. Something deeper rekindling after decades of separation. One battle ended, others beginning. But for now, rest was authorized, medically required. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to protect future soldiers through systems designed with integrity rather than compromise. Iron Jack Morrison surrendered temporarily to healing sleep. The warrior at rest, but not defeated, never defeated. Chapter 8. Lessons from the Battlefield. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows as Morrison reviewed the newspapers. The Excalibur scandal had expanded beyond defense procurement into broader questions of government oversight. Congressional committees launching investigations, regulatory agencies examining similar programs. The initial exposure creating ripple effects throughout the system. Major Hayes arrived bearing coffee and technical documents. The young officer appeared transformed, the strain of recent weeks replaced by purposeful energy. Vindication after persecution. "The Secretary has formally approved the new tank requirements committee, sir. With you as chairman, effective immediately. Excellent news, Major. When do we begin? Preliminary meetings next week, sir, after your discharge from medical care. Morrison nodded, accepted the technical documents Hayes had brought, specifications for potential Excalibur alternatives. Evolutionary approaches rather than revolutionary redesigns. Systems prioritizing reliability and crew safety alongside combat effectiveness. Your input was instrumental in these preliminary concepts, sir. The engineering team incorporated your concerns about digital interfaces and autoloader reliability. Morrison reviewed the documents with professional attention. The proposed alternatives addressed Excalibur's most critical flaws, balanced technological advancement with proven reliability, prioritized crew survivability alongside combat effectiveness. Good work, Major. This provides a solid foundation for the committee's deliberations. Hayes hesitated before continuing. Sir, there's something I've wanted to ask since this began, something I don't fully understand. Go ahead. When you first identified problems with Excalibur, you could have simply documented them through official channels, completed your assignment and retired as planned. Instead, you pursued the truth despite increasing personal risk, despite surveillance and eventual violence. Hayes studied his former commander. Why, sir? What drove you to continue when others would have withdrawn? Morrison considered the question carefully. Not because the answer was unclear, but because its articulation mattered. During Desert Storm, my company faced Republican Guard armor at Al Bergen oil field. 16 enemy tanks destroyed without American casualties. A textbook victory. Hayes nodded, familiar with the famous engagement. What wasn't widely reported was the equipment failure beforehand. 2 of my tanks developed critical mechanical issues during approach. Couldn't participate in the battle. Pure luck those crews weren't isolated and overrun. Morrison's gaze turned distant, seeing not the hospital room but the Kuwaiti desert 30 years prior. After the battle, I found those crews conducting emergency repairs, asked why the issues hadn't been reported during pre-combat checks. The lead mechanic showed me maintenance records documenting the exact fault 5 separate times during stateside training. Each time reported properly, each time dismissed as within operational parameters by acquisition authorities. Morrison returned his focus to Hayes. The systems that determine what equipment reaches the battlefield aren't abstract bureaucratic processes, Major. They're life and death decisions executed at distance, time-delayed sentences determining which soldiers return home and which don't. You are protecting future tank crews, sir. Exactly. Not just from Excalibur's specific flaws, but from the system that allowed those flaws to be hidden, suppressed, denied despite clear documentation. Hayes straightened unconsciously, the posture of a soldier receiving mission guidance from a respected commander. The Requirements Committee gives us opportunity to build something better, sir. Not just a superior tank, but a superior development process. That's precisely our mission, Major, one that continues long after Excalibur itself is forgotten. Their discussion continued. Technical specifications, testing protocols, the integration of medical monitoring into crew interface evaluation. Building not merely a better tank, but a better system for developing and evaluating combat vehicles. As Hayes departed, Sarah Baker arrived. Her medical authority had expanded since the scandal broke. Her department now central to evaluating crew interfaces in all combat systems, not just tanks. Your vital signs are improving, pain indicators decreasing. She checked his shoulder wound. The doctors are discussing discharge within 48 hours. Excellent. The Requirements Committee begins preliminary meetings next week. Sarah shook her head with familiar exasperation. Always the mission first. The mission is why we serve, Sarah, why we endure, why we continue despite obstacles. She settled into the chair beside his bed. I've been reviewing the medical testing protocols for the new tank program. They're incorporating everything I documented about crew neurological stress, everything that was suppressed in Excalibur's development. Progress emerges from failure properly analyzed. The philosopher warrior speaks. She smiled briefly. Your influence extends beyond this single program, Jack. The medical monitoring protocols we developed are being adapted for aircraft systems, naval vessels, any military equipment where human operators interface with complex technology. That's the true victory, Sarah. Not exposing one flawed program, but improving the system that develops all programs. Their conversation shifted to personal matters. The decades since Desert Storm, the paths their lives had taken, the possibility of reconnection beyond professional collaboration. We were different people then, Jack. Young, idealistic, shaped by war but not yet defined by full careers. Different but not unrecognizable, the core remains. Sarah's hand found his. Perhaps so. The moment held between them. Connection transcending professional association. Possibility emerging from shared purpose and rekindled understanding. The remainder of Morrison's hospital stay passed in productive work. Consultation with Chen's committee staff on procurement reform legislation. Planning for the requirements committee's initial meetings. Review of technical alternatives to Excalibur's flawed systems. Throughout, Peterson kept him updated on broader developments. The FBI investigation expanding into financial connections between defense contractors and congressional oversight. The Pentagon implementing interim procurement reforms while legislation developed. The defense industry adapting to new scrutiny with enhanced transparency initiatives. The system responds when properly motivated will. Indeed, though I remain realistic about long-term change, Peterson's voice carried the wisdom of decades navigating Pentagon politics. Institutional momentum is powerful, Jack. Reform often fades as attention shifts to new crises, which is why our work must continue beyond this immediate scandal. Build structural safeguards that remain when public attention inevitably moves elsewhere. Precisely why the Secretary wanted you heading the Requirements Committee. Your perspective extends beyond technical specifications to institutional integrity. 2 days later, Morrison was discharged from Walter Reed. Sarah insisted he recuperate at her home in Arlington rather than returning to his compromised apartment. Professional concern and personal reconnection merging into natural care. Her townhouse was comfortable, filled with books and artwork reflecting decades of service and travel. Morrison settled into the guest room, adjusted to civilian surroundings after a lifetime in military environments. The evening before the Requirements Committee's first meeting, Morrison sat with Sarah on her patio, the Potomac visible in the distance, the Capitol's monuments illuminated against the night sky. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked. Focused rather than nervous. The opportunity is significant, to build not just a better tank, but a better development process. Always the mission, not always Sarah. Morrison took her hand. Recent events have clarified perspectives beyond duty, beyond service. She studied him in the dim light. 40 years focused exclusively on military service, Jack. Can you truly imagine life with other priorities? I'm imagining it now. The moment held between them. Connection deepening beyond professional respect or rekindled attraction. Two lives separately devoted to service finding potential convergence after decades apart. The following morning, Morrison prepared methodically for the committee meeting. Dress uniform despite retired status. Silver eagles still on his shoulders. Medals arrayed precisely. The bearing of command ingrained through decades of service. Sarah drove him to the Pentagon. The massive building appeared different now. Not just a headquarters, but the physical manifestation of systems both impressive and flawed. Morrison had spent his career serving those systems. Now he returned to reform them. The conference room assigned to the Requirements Committee reflected the program's importance. Spacious, well-equipped. Views of the Potomac through wide windows. The committee members arrived individually. Major Hayes, technical experts from Aberdeen testing grounds, engineers from multiple defense contractors not limited to quantum, representatives from congressional oversight, Sarah as medical systems authority. Peterson opened proceedings with formal authority but minimal ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your service on this critical committee. Colonel Morrison will chair your deliberations with full authority from the Secretary's office. Your mission extends beyond developing a superior tank to reforming the process by which combat systems are conceived, tested, and approved. As Peterson departed, Morrison surveyed the assembled experts. Diverse backgrounds, varied perspectives, united by commitment to creating systems worthy of the troops who would stake their lives upon them. Our task is significant but clear. We will develop requirements for a next-generation combat vehicle that delivers genuine battlefield superiority while ensuring crew survivability. We will establish testing protocols that identify problems before production rather than concealing them to maintain program momentum. Morrison moved to the whiteboard, wrote 3 principles in precise military handwriting: technical excellence, crew, survivability, testing, integrity. These principles will guide every aspect of our work, every specification, every design decision, every testing protocol. Morrison faced the committee directly. We are not merely building a better tank. We are building a better system for developing, protecting, and fielding the men and women who will operate it. The committee's work began immediately. Initial focus on Excalibur's critical flaws and how alternative approaches might address them. The digital interface systems that created neurological stress. The autoloader mechanisms that failed during extended operations. The drive systems vulnerable to electronic warfare. Hayes led technical discussions with confidence born from vindication. His concerns about Excalibur, once dismissed as disruptive, now central to developing superior alternatives. Sarah presented comprehensive medical monitoring protocols, systems for evaluating crew neurological stress during extended operations, standards for interface design that accommodated human cognitive limitations rather than ignoring them. Throughout, Morrison guided discussions toward practical solutions rather than theoretical perfection, his combat experience providing context that technical specifications alone could not capture. The most sophisticated targeting system is worthless if it induces cognitive fatigue after 6 hours of operation. The most powerful main gun useless if its autoloader jams during rapid-fire engagements. By day's end, the committee had established clear direction, not revolutionary redesign, but evolutionary improvement, building on proven systems while incorporating advanced technology where genuinely beneficial, prioritizing reliability and crew effectiveness alongside technical specifications. Morrison concluded the session with characteristic directness. Today we've begun important work that extends beyond this specific program. The procurement reforms emerging from Excalibur's failure will protect future generations of American soldiers, will ensure they enter combat with equipment worthy of their courage. As committee members departed, Peterson returned, accompanied by the Secretary of the Army himself, the civilian leader responsible for all Army programs and personnel. Colonel Morrison, the Secretary extended his hand. Your service exposing Excalibur's flaws demonstrates the highest traditions of military integrity. Your willingness to continue serving, despite recent events, is commendable. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The mission continues. Indeed it does, and extends beyond this specific program to reform of our entire acquisition process. The Secretary's expression reflected both authority and genuine concern. The men and women who serve this nation deserve equipment that performs as promised, systems tested with integrity rather than expediency. That has always been my priority, sir, and why you're ideal for this role, Colonel. Your combat experience combined with moral courage provides perspective our acquisition system desperately needs. The brief meeting concluded with the Secretary's firm support for both the committee's work and the broader procurement reforms emerging from congressional investigations. As Morrison departed the Pentagon with Sarah, he noticed media gathered at the river entrance. His involvement with the Requirements Committee had become public knowledge. The whistleblower colonel now leading development of Excalibur's replacement. Your public profile has expanded considerably, Sarah observed as they avoided the reporters. Not by choice or design, but with significant impact. You've become symbol as much as individual Jack, the decorated veteran wounded while exposing corruption that endangered soldiers. Morrison considered this unwanted public attention, the media narratives developing around his actions and their consequences, the personalization of institutional failures and reforms. Symbols fade, Sarah. Public attention shifts inevitably to new controversies. What matters is structural change that outlasts momentary scrutiny. The philosopher-warrior perspective again. The realist perspective, from 40 years observing how systems respond to pressure, then return to established patterns when that pressure diminishes. They return to Sarah's townhouse. Morrison still recovering from his wound despite resumed duties. Still adapting to civilian environments after decades of military surroundings. That evening, Morrison received an unexpected call. Senator Chen. Colonel, the procurement reform legislation has cleared committee with unanimous support. Floor vote scheduled next week with passage virtually certain. That's excellent news, Senator. Your testimony was instrumental, Colonel. The technical details combined with your personal sacrifice created moral imperative few could oppose. The facts spoke for themselves, Senator. Facts require proper presentation, Colonel. Proper context. Chen's voice carried the authority of both military and political experience. Your willingness to risk career and personal safety in pursuit of truth provided that context. Transformed technical specifications and testing protocols into matters of moral urgency. After the call concluded, Sarah studied Morrison from across the living room. The impact of your actions continues expanding Jack, beyond Excalibur itself to systemic reform. The system responds when properly motivated. when confronted with irrefutable evidence and moral clarity. She moved to sit beside him on the couch. You provided both. As did you, Sarah, as did Hayes, as did many others who risked careers to document Excalibur's flaws. But you led the effort, Jack, coordinated our separate concerns into comprehensive exposure, accepted the greatest personal risk. Morrison shook his head slightly. Leadership receives disproportionate credit for collective achievement. Always has. The humble warrior now. The realistic one. No single individual reforms systems this complex. Change requires multiple perspectives, diverse expertise, collective determination. Sarah's hand found his. Yet catalysts matter, Jack. Individuals whose actions crystallize broader concerns into focused reform. The evening continued with conversation ranging beyond Excalibur and procurement reform to personal reflections. Lives separated for decades rediscovering connection, finding common ground beyond professional collaboration. The following weeks established rhythm-balancing committee leadership with physical recovery, Morrison guiding technical discussions while regaining strength, shaping both next-generation tank requirements and the processes by which they would be developed and tested. Throughout, media interest remained intense, but Morrison limited engagement, focused on substantive progress rather than public narratives, on building systems that would protect future tank crews rather than personal vindication. Peterson kept him updated on broader developments. The FBI investigation resulting in criminal charges against several quantum executives, including Blackwood himself. The Pentagon implementing interim procurement reforms while legislation progressed through Congress. The defense industry adapting to enhanced scrutiny with transparency initiatives. The shooter has provided detailed testimony, Jack, identified the quantum security executive who hired him. Financial records confirm payments. Criminal conspiracy charges filed. Justice proceeds. Slowly but definitively, the corruption extended beyond Excalibur to multiple programs, multiple contractors. The investigation continues expanding as new evidence emerges. 1 month after his discharge from Walter Reed, Morrison chaired a milestone meeting of the Requirements Committee. Final approval of the core specifications for Excalibur's replacement. Not revolutionary redesign, but evolutionary improvement of proven systems. Enhanced with technology where beneficial, but prioritizing reliability and crew effectiveness. Hayes presented the technical specifications with professional confidence. Sarah outlined the medical monitoring protocols that would ensure crew interfaces remained within human cognitive limitations. Other committee members contributed specialized expertise ranging from logistics to battlefield maintenance. As the session concluded, Peterson arrived accompanied again by the Secretary of the Army. The civilian leader reviewed the committee's work with evident approval. You've accomplished in weeks what normally takes years, Colonel. Defined requirements that balance technical advancement with practical combat effectiveness. The foundation was already established, Mr. Secretary. What Excalibur lacked wasn't technical knowledge, but program integrity, testing honesty, commitment to soldier safety above program momentum. Precisely why this committee has succeeded where Excalibur failed. The Secretary addressed the entire group. Your work will protect future generations of American soldiers. Will ensure they enter combat with equipment that performs as promised rather than as marketed. After formal approval of the requirements document, Peterson remained behind as other committee members departed. The general appeared more relaxed than Morrison had seen him in months. The strain of hidden corruption replaced by focused purpose. The procurement reform legislation passed Congress yesterday, Jack. Overwhelming bipartisan support. The president will sign it next week. That's welcome news, Will. Your testimony directly shaped key provisions. Enhanced whistleblower protections. Mandatory disclosure of testing anomalies. Criminal penalties for falsifying safety data. Structural reforms that will outlast momentary scrutiny. Exactly. Peterson studied his old friend with evident respect. You've accomplished more in retirement than most officers achieve in active careers, Jack. Not alone, Will. Many contributed to exposing Excalibur's flaws, to developing these reforms, to creating superior alternatives. True, but your leadership provided the catalyst, the moral clarity that transformed technical concerns into matters of urgency. Morrison accepted this assessment without false modesty. Leadership carried responsibility for failure. Could acknowledge credit for success with equal candor. What happens now, Will? The replacement program proceeds under your committee's guidance. Criminal prosecutions continue against those who corrupted Excalibur's development. Procurement reforms implement across all defense acquisition programs. Peterson smiled slightly. And perhaps Colonel James Morrison finally takes legitimate retirement, finds purpose beyond military service. Perhaps. As Morrison departed the Pentagon with Sarah, he reflected on Peterson's suggestion. Retirement, purpose beyond military service, possibilities emerging after 40 years of singular focus. The Washington evening spread before them, monuments illuminated against darkening sky, the physical manifestations of the nation they had served through separate but parallel careers. Will suggested I consider actual retirement, purpose beyond military service. Sarah glanced at him as she drove. Can you imagine that, Jack? After 40 years of absolute focus? I'm beginning to. The moment held between them, connection deepening beyond professional respect or rekindled attraction. Two lives separately devoted to service finding convergence after decades apart. What would retirement mean for the legendary Iron Jack Morrison? Time for reflection, for writing perhaps, for sharing experience with future officers. Morrison turned toward her, for relationships beyond professional collaboration. Sarah's expression softened. The warrior considers life beyond the battlefield. The man considers life beyond the mission. Their conversation continued as they returned to Arlington, to Sarah's townhouse that had become temporary home during Morrison's recovery. Possibilities expanding beyond committee leadership and procurement reform to personal reconnection, to lives shaped by service finding new dimensions in their remaining years. Chapter 9, The Steel Legacy. 3 months after the Excalibur scandal broke, Morrison stood at the Pentagon River entrance, silver eagles still on his shoulders despite technical retired status. Medals aligned precisely on his chest, the warrior's bearing unchanged despite recent events. The president's motorcade approached precisely on schedule. Security vehicles, the distinctive presidential limousine, follow vehicles containing staff and additional protection. Morrison straightened unconsciously as the commander-in-chief emerged from the limousine, the president approaching with the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Army flanking him. Colonel Morrison, as the president extended his hand, "Your service exposing procurement irregularities demonstrates the highest traditions of military integrity." "Thank you, Mr. President. I simply fulfilled my oath." An oath many recite, but fewer fulfill when institutional pressure suggests compromise. The president gestured toward the Pentagon. "Shall we proceed? The ceremony begins shortly." They entered the building together, proceeded through corridors to the auditorium where procurement reform legislation would be formally signed, where the replacement for Excalibur would be officially announced, where structural changes to defense acquisition would be codified in law and policy. The auditorium was filled with military officers, defense officials, congressional representatives, media documenting the administration's response to procurement scandal with enhanced oversight and reform processes. Morrison took his assigned seat in the front row, Sarah beside him representing medical monitoring protocols, Hayes nearby as technical lead for the replacement program, Peterson on the stage with other senior leadership. The president approached the podium after formal introduction, addressed the assembled officials and media with practiced authority. "Today we take significant steps to ensure America's defense procurement system delivers equipment worthy of the men and women who stake their lives upon it. The Excalibur scandal exposed systemic vulnerabilities in how we develop, test, and approve combat systems. Vulnerabilities that place program momentum and financial interests above soldier safety and combat effectiveness." The president gestured toward the legislation awaiting his signature. "This comprehensive reform creates structural safeguards ensuring testing integrity, mandating safety transparency, protecting those who report legitimate concerns from retaliation or marginalization." His gaze found Morrison in the front row. None of this would be possible without individuals of exceptional moral courage, without decorated veterans who continued serving their country by exposing corruption despite personal risk, without dedicated professionals who place soldier safety above career advancement or institutional pressure. The ceremony proceeded with formal signing of the legislation, with announcement of the new tank program that would replace Excalibur, with introduction of the requirements committee that had defined its specifications and testing protocols. Morrison listened with professional attention but personal detachment. The public ceremony represented institutional adaptation to expose failures, the system responding when properly motivated, creating new narratives that acknowledge problems while preserving broader structures. After the formal ceremony concluded, the president requested private conversation with Morrison. They moved to a small conference room adjacent to the auditorium. The most powerful civilian in America and the retired colonel who had exposed corruption in defense procurement. Colonel, your actions have created rare opportunity for genuine reform, for structural change that outlasts momentary scrutiny. That has always been my objective, Mr. President. I understand that and appreciate the perspective of someone who has commanded tanks in combat, who understands what's truly at stake when equipment fails to perform as promised. The president studied Morrison with evident respect. What happens after this reform momentum inevitably dissipates, Colonel? How do we maintain procurement integrity when public attention shifts elsewhere? Morrison considered the question carefully, not because the answer was unclear, but because its articulation to the commander-in-chief carried special significance. Structural safeguards help, Mr. President, enhance whistleblower protections, mandatory disclosure requirements, criminal penalties for falsification. But ultimately, systems reflect the priorities of those who lead them. Continue. When program advancement and financial execution outweigh technical performance, and soldier safety, procurement integrity suffers regardless of formal regulations. When career advancement depends more on meeting artificial deadlines than addressing legitimate problems, corruption becomes inevitable. You're suggesting cultural change rather than merely regulatory reform. I'm suggesting both are necessary, Mr. President. Regulations without cultural commitment become bureaucratic exercises rather than meaningful safeguards. The president nodded, understanding the distinction between formal compliance and genuine integrity. What would you recommend specifically, Colonel, beyond the legislation already signed? Promotion criteria that reward identification and correction of problems rather than punishing bearers of unwelcome information. Leadership selection that prioritizes technical competence alongside program management. Most importantly, direct connection between acquisition authorities and the soldiers who stake their lives on the equipment they approve. Maintaining the human element in increasingly technical processes. Exactly, Mr. President. The most sophisticated testing protocols cannot replace the perspective of those who have commanded tanks in combat, who have experienced equipment failure under enemy fire, who have written letters to families of soldiers who didn't return. Their conversation continued for 20 minutes. Morrison providing unvarnished assessment based on 40 years of military service. The president listening with genuine interest beyond political calculation. Two men from different backgrounds united by shared commitment to those who served in uniform. As the meeting concluded, the president offered final thoughts. Your service continues beyond retirement, Colonel. Beyond exposing Excalibur's flaws to shaping how we prevent similar failures in future programs. The mission evolves, Mr. President, but commitment to those who serve remains constant. Morrison departed the Pentagon that afternoon with Sarah beside him. His formal role with the Requirements Committee complete with final specifications approved. His testimony before congressional investigations concluded with procurement reform legislation signed, his purpose shifting from exposing corruption to preventing its recurrence. You seem contemplative, Sarah observed as they walked toward the parking area. Considering next chapters, both professional and personal, the warrior imagines life beyond the battlefield. The man acknowledges life beyond the mission. Morrison turned toward her, the Potomac visible behind them, the Capitol's monuments in the distance. We've spent decades in separate service, Sarah, found reconnection through shared purpose, exposing Excalibur's flaws. And now? Now we consider possibilities beyond professional collaboration, beyond committee meetings and congressional testimony. Sarah's expression softened. The legendary Iron Jack Morrison contemplating actual retirement, personal priorities alongside public service. Not retirement from purpose, transition to different purpose. Their conversation continued as they drove toward Arlington, towards Sarah's townhouse that had become more than temporary accommodation during Morrison's recovery, had become foundation for reconnection beyond professional respect, for relationship emerging after decades of separation. That evening, Morrison sat on Sarah's patio, the Capitol illuminated across the Potomac. Peterson had called earlier with updates on the criminal investigation. Blackwood indicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. General Reynolds cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. The system administering consequences to those who had corrupted it. Sarah joined him with coffee, settled into the adjacent chair that had become her habitual place during evening conversations. their relationship evolving naturally from professional collaboration to personal connection, from shared mission to shared life. What are you thinking about Jack? 40 years of service, battles across 3 continents, commands ranging from platoon to regiment. Morrison's gaze remained on the distant monuments, the physical manifestations of the nation he had served throughout his adult life. And perhaps my most significant contribution made after retirement, in procurement reform rather than battlefield command. Purpose finds expression in unexpected contexts. Indeed, Morrison turned toward her. I've received offers to write memoirs, to lecture at the War College, to consult on defense reform beyond tank procurement. All worthy pursuits, yes, but incomplete without personal dimension alongside professional contribution. Sarah's hand found his, understanding his meaning without explicit declaration. The warrior acknowledges needs beyond duty. The man acknowledges life beyond service. Their conversation continued into evening. Lives shaped separately by decades of service, finding convergence in remaining years. Professional respect evolving into deeper connection. Shared mission expanding into shared future. 1 month later, Morrison stood before cadets at West Point, the institution that had shaped his early military development, now seeking his perspective on leadership integrity, on moral courage when systems suggest compromise. You will face decisions throughout your careers that policy manuals cannot adequately address. Moments when regulations conflict with reality. When institutional momentum contradicts professional judgment. Morrison surveyed the young faces before him. Future officers who would lead America's soldiers in conflicts yet unimagined. In those moments, remember that your primary obligation remains to the men and women under your command, to their safety, their effectiveness, their return to families who entrust them to your leadership. The lecture continued with specific examples from both combat command and procurement oversight, lessons drawn from battlefield experience and institutional reform, the perspective of a warrior who had served with distinction across multiple domains. As Morrison concluded, Sarah waited at the back of the auditorium, their relationship now public, their future together openly acknowledged. 2 lives shaped by service to nation, finding personal fulfillment in connection with each other. You made an impression. Sarah nodded toward cadets surrounding Morrison after formal conclusion, young officers seeking additional guidance, personal connection with the decorated veteran whose integrity had reformed procurement systems. They seek reassurance that systems can be improved when necessary, that individual moral courage remains relevant in institutional contexts. And you provided that reassurance. I offered perspective from experience, nothing more. They departed West Point together, continued their speaking tour of military educational institutions, Morrison sharing lessons from both battlefield command and procurement reform, Sarah contributing medical perspective on human factors in combat system development. Their professional collaboration continued alongside personal relationship, shared purpose in military education, complementing shared life in suburban Virginia, the home they had purchased together near Quantico, the future they were building after decades of separate service. Throughout, Morrison maintained connection with the tank program replacing Excalibur, not through formal authority, but respected consultation. Hayes leading technical development with regular updates to the retired colonel, whose exposure of corruption had created opportunity for superior alternatives. The evolutionary approach is proving superior to Excalibur's revolutionary redesign, sir, Hayes reported during one consultation. Enhanced versions of proven systems performing exceptionally in extended testing. And the crew interface issues Sarah identified? Completely addressed through modified design and comprehensive monitoring. Neurological stress remains within acceptable parameters even during extended operations. Morrison nodded with professional satisfaction. The lessons from Excalibur's failure properly applied to its replacement. The procurement reforms functioning as intended to prioritize soldier safety alongside technical performance. As their consultation concluded, Hayes offered personal observation. Your legacy extends beyond exposing Excalibur's flaws, sir, beyond procurement reform legislation or enhanced testing protocols. How so, Major? You've demonstrated that integrity remains relevant in modern defense acquisition, that moral courage can effectively challenge corrupted systems despite institutional resistance. Morrison considered this assessment, the perspective of a younger officer whose career had nearly ended for exposing legitimate safety concerns, who had found vindication through procurement reform and professional advancement. Systems reflect the integrity of those who operate them, Major. Regulations alone cannot prevent corruption when cultural priorities favor program momentum over honest evaluation. A lesson I'll carry throughout my career, sir. The conversation continued with technical updates on prototype testing, with medical monitoring results from extended operations, with preparation for limited production authorization expected within months. Throughout, Morrison maintained the commander's focus on mission accomplishment rather than personal recognition, on protecting future tank crews rather than securing his place in procurement history, on integrity as practical necessity rather than abstract virtue. 6 months after the Excalibur scandal broke, Morrison received formal invitation to the prototype unveiling of its replacement, the M1A3 Defender. Not revolutionary redesign, but evolutionary improvement of proven systems. Enhanced with technology were beneficial, but prioritizing reliability and crew effectiveness. The ceremony took place at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, where Excalibur's flaws had been documented then suppressed, where its replacement had been developed with transparent testing and honest evaluation. Morrison attended with Sarah beside him, observed with professional satisfaction as Hayes presented the new tank's capabilities, its enhanced protection systems, improved targeting interfaces, reliable autoloader mechanisms, all developed with comprehensive testing that identified and addressed problems rather than concealing them. Most significant were the crew interfaces incorporating Sarah's medical monitoring protocols, systems designed around human cognitive limitations rather than ignoring them, technology enhancing soldier capability rather than inducing neurological stress through poorly designed interaction. After the formal presentation, the Secretary of the Army approached Morrison directly. "Your influence permeates this program, Colonel, not through direct design contribution, but through the integrity with which it has been developed and tested. The program reflects lessons properly applied, Mr. Secretary, nothing more. It reflects cultural change, Colonel, procurement processes that prioritize soldier safety and combat effectiveness above program momentum or financial execution." Morrison accepted this assessment without false modesty. Cultural change had indeed been his ultimate objective, beyond exposing Excalibur's specific flaws. Reform that would protect future generations of American soldiers regardless of specific weapon systems. As the ceremony concluded, Morrison stood with Sarah before the prototype tank, its angular armor reflecting Aberdeen's sunlight, its advanced systems representing genuine technological progress without Excalibur's compromised development. "Your legacy made tangible," Sarah observed. "Not my legacy, Sarah. The legacy of many who risked careers to document legitimate concerns, to maintain integrity despite institutional pressure. But catalyzed by your leadership, Jack, your willingness to continue investigating despite surveillance and intimidation, despite eventual violence." Morrison studied the tank without responding directly, the machine representing not merely improved technology, but reformed procurement processes. Systems developed with integrity rather than compromise, with honest evaluation rather than predetermined conclusions. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "With the program secured, the reforms implemented, the prosecutions proceeding." Morrison turned toward her, the woman who had rekindled connection after 30 years of separation, who had created new dimensions in life previously defined exclusively by military service. "Now we continue building life beyond duty, Sarah, purpose beyond service." Her hand found his. The warrior embraces peace. The man embraces life in all its dimensions. They departed Aberdeen together, the mission accomplished but life continuing. Professional contribution secured but personal fulfillment expanding. Service to nation complemented by connection with each other. Iron Jack Morrison had commanded tanks across 3 continents, had led men into combat knowing some wouldn't return, had exposed corruption in defense procurement despite surveillance, intimidation, and violence. His most significant battle had been his last. Not fought with tanks and guns, but with information and integrity, with moral courage when systems suggested compromise, with unwavering commitment to those who stake their lives on equipment developed in distant offices and approved in Pentagon conference rooms. That battle won, Morrison turned toward new horizons, toward life with Sarah beside him, toward purpose beyond military service while maintaining commitment to those who continued serving in uniform. The warrior had completed his final mission. The man embraced possibilities beyond the battlefield.